Chapter 1908. With that, she hurried to catch up. In the hall, the old scholar paced back and forth with his hands behind his back, thinking about what to say to the two girls. At this moment, the two girls walked into the hall. Zhang Yuyao stepped forward and asked with concern, "Sir, do you have any news about Prince Zhang?" The old scholar looked at the two girls meaningfully and nodded. Yes, there is news about Fengzi, but, at this point his eyes flashed with worry. But Fengzi is not in a good situation now. I heard that he is floating towards the grassland. What? Zhang Yuyao exclaimed in disbelief. As a girl, although she did not know much about national affairs, she knew that the grassland was the hinterland of the Turks. If Prince Zhang went there, would he still be alive? What if something happened to Prince Zhang? What would she do? Thinking of this, she could not help but feel sad. Jing Shu, on the other hand, was different. She was usually more knowledgeable and had a broader vision. The first thing that came to her mind was why Prince Zhang went to the grassland. That was the territory of the Turks. Going there was no doubt that he would die. Prince Zhang would not be so stupid to do such a brainless thing. Therefore, she began to guess in her heart. The old scholar saw that the two girls did not speak and thought that they were too sad. He quickly comforted them. Girls, don't be sad. Although Fengzi is floating towards the grassland, he is not in danger for the time being. Really? Zhang Yuyao suddenly raised her head and looked at the old scholar expectantly. Jingshu was also awakened by the conversation between the two. She quickly looked at the old scholar and asked hopefully, "Sir, what is going on?" She had a feeling that there was something behind this. Prince Zhang had no reason to go to the grassland, but she could not figure out why. Now she could only ask for help from her teacher. The old Xiaozai didn't beat around the bush. He looked at the two women and said seriously, "That's right. There's news from the palace that Chen Yaojin and Li Jing have gone to rescue Fengzi. The emperor has also given the order to rescue Fengzi. The old men on the mountain have also volunteered to send their servants to look for Fengzi. So you don't have to worry." Hearing this, the two women's hearts finally calmed down. If His Majesty gave the order, Prince Zhang shouldn't be in any danger. After all, the emperor was the most powerful person in the world. If he couldn't save her, then who could? There were also those gentlemen on the mountain. Basically, all of them were highly respected people. If they were willing to help, Prince Zhang wouldn't be in any danger, right? Thinking of this, Zhang Yuyao finally revealed a smile. "Thank you, sir, for your hard work for Prince Zhang this time. We sisters would like to salute you on behalf of Prince Zhang." After saying this, she pulled Jingshu and respectfully bowed to the old Xiaozai. The old Xiaozai didn't hold back and accepted the salute with ease. He was Zhang Feng's teacher in name, so he could accept this salute. The two women had just stood up and were about to speak when the sound of footsteps came from outside the door. A servant came in with a cup of tea. Zhang Yuyao looked at Jingshu and instantly understood. This must have been arranged by Jingshu. She couldn't help but praise Jingshu in her heart. Then she looked at the old Xiaozai and realized that after talking for so long, they still hadn't invited him to take a seat. With a guilty expression, she said, "Sir, please take a seat. We sisters have been rude. You've been here for so long and we still haven't invited you to take a seat." After saying this, she personally picked up a cup of tea and handed it to the old Xiaozai. She bowed and said, "Sir, please have some tea." The old Xiaozai naturally didn't care about such details. Those who could come to Zhang Mansion were naturally family. So he casually found a seat and sat down. He smiled and said, "You're welcome. We're all family." Jingshu nodded and said with a smile, "Sir, you're right." Then the two women didn't stand on ceremony. They both sat down and talked about the cotton-padded clothes in the yard. At the same time, on the main street of Chang'an, there were people coming and going, and it was very lively. Peddlers, servants, and others weaved in and out of the crowd, shouting all kinds of songs. They were like fish swimming in the sea, doing whatever they wanted. There was a dazzling array of delicacies on the side of the street. There were wontons, steamed biscuits, and so on, emitting bursts of delicious aroma. Along the way, there were soldiers walking back and forth. They were wearing armor and holding triangular bayonets. They were extraordinary and added a solemn atmosphere to the street, making people feel intimidated. They were sent by the Ministry of War to patrol. Since the Xuanwu Gate incident, there had been casualties in Chang'an. Li Shimin gathered the ministers for a discussion and thought that it was useless to just stand guard. They had to do something practical. Although they knew that the Xuanwu Gate incident was a farce, they wanted to prevent the same thing from happening in the future. Li Shimin ordered that 12 teams of soldiers would be arranged to patrol Chang'an city every day. They would be changed every 2 hours. Although it cost some soldiers, it greatly increased the sense of security of the people. Think about it. If there were any thievery, burning, killing, and looting in Chang'an city, the people could immediately report to the patrolling soldiers. In this way, they could stop it immediately. Chapter 1909. Regarding this matter, the people praised His Majesty for being wise. Although the Xuanwu Gate incident happened before, His Majesty had already issued an edict. The people let go of the grudges in their hearts, and even secretly thought of His Majesty's achievements. His Majesty did some wrong things, but there was nothing to say about the people. He could always be called an emperor who loved the people like his own children. Thinking of Emperor Yang of Sui, His Majesty could be called wise. There was also the dethroned Crown Prince Li Jiansheng. Even if this guy ascended the throne, he might not do as well as His Majesty. Therefore, the people were still happy to support Li Shimin. Of course, the shoulder-bearer Huzi also thought so. At that time, he went to see the edict with his own eyes. His Majesty said it so sincerely. It was obvious that he was sincerely remorseful. Since His Majesty was sincerely remorseful, it meant that he was a wise emperor. Since he was a wise emperor, it meant that his future days would be better. Thinking of this, his footsteps unconsciously became lighter. The corner of his mouth raised and he shouted, "Steamed buns, good steamed buns, 1 copper coin each." At this moment, a group of soldiers walked over. Huzi was delighted and hurriedly went up to them. "Sir, how about a few steamed buns?" The leading soldier stopped and looked at the white steamed buns in front of him. He couldn't help but swallow his saliva and wanted to take it. However, when he thought of His Majesty's order, if anyone dared to take things from the people, their hands would be chopped off or their official position would be removed. After thinking for a while, he shook his head and said, "No, His Majesty's order is not to take anything from the people. Otherwise your hands will be chopped off." After saying this, he raised his head, straightened his military uniform, and started patrolling again. Huzi was a little confused. He didn't expect His Majesty to give such an order. Not to take anything from the people. Otherwise, your hands will be chopped off? Wasn't this too strict? However, on second thought, His Majesty seemed to be protecting him. This could prevent the soldiers from filling their pockets while patrolling. Thinking of this, he felt a wave of respect for His Majesty. Fine, no one would eat it. He could sell it for a few more money. Just as he was about to take the load and leave, a shout came. "Huzi, Huzi." Huzi turned his head and saw Zhuzi running over with a load. He was delighted and hurriedly went up to him. "Zhuzi, aren't you selling glutinous rice wine near Zhang Mansion? Are you done?" As he spoke, he patted the jar of fermented glutinous rice on the pillar, his heart filled with envy. Zhuzi, on the other hand, didn't think much of it. He grabbed Huzi's right hand and said excitedly, "Let's go to that corner. Lao Tzu will tell you a big piece of news from the Zhang residence." Big news in Zhang Mansion. Huzi scratched his head and was a little confused. He was about to ask, but found that his right hand was not listening to him. He turned his head and saw that it was Zhuzi who was about to pull him away. He quickly said, "Wait, I'll go carry the load first." After he finished speaking, he flung Zhuzi's hand away and picked up the pole in a few strides. He turned around and patted Zhuzi on the shoulder. "Let's go. Lao Tzu wants to see what kind of big news you have." Zhuzi didn't waste any time. He held onto the pole and walked towards the corner they had agreed on earlier. After standing still, the two of them put down their burdens and sat on the ground. Huzi looked at the pillar and said with a curious look, "Tell me now, what on earth is going on?" "Let me tell you." Zhuzi smiled and turned his head to look around. Seeing that there was no one around, he looked at Huzi. "Just now one of my men said that the thing that appeared in Chang'an city a few days ago was made by President Zhang." "What?" Huzi exclaimed and his eyes widened. To be honest, he had been selling steamed buns in Chang'an and city for the past few years. He could be considered a wily old fox. He had heard all kinds of news. It was either that the rich family had married a widow, or that the family's official had his property confiscated. However, this Zhang mansion was a little different. Every time the news came out, it almost shocked Chang'an City. For example, in the past, there was an academy, and then there was the braised meat, and so on. There were too many to count. At first, everyone thought that this guy was crazy. But later, when they had a taste of the sweetness, well, it was really delicious. But this time it was a little too shocking, wasn't it? The hot air balloon last time was actually made by President Zhang? This was a little unbelievable. Therefore, he looked at Zhu Zi with a puzzled look and asked, "Is what you said true? Why do I feel that you are bragging? No matter how awesome President Zhang is, it is impossible for him to go to the sky, right?" Zhu Zi was unhappy when he heard that. He glared at him and said, "This is the news that Lao Tzu found out with great difficulty. How dare you say that Lao Tzu is bragging?" After that, he stared at Hu Zi and said unforgivingly, "To tell you the truth, not only did President Zhang make that thing that can go to the sky, I also heard that he went to Shenzhou and blew up the Turkic camp." "What?" Hu Zi jumped 8 feet high. "That was 2F** King explosive, wasn't it? Blew up the Turkic camp? How was that possible? Shenzhou was at least a few hundred miles away from Chang'an. How did he get there? Taking a step back, even if he blew up the Turkic camp, he wouldn't be able to survive." Chapter 1910. President Zhang was not stupid. How could he do such a brainless thing? He felt more and more that this guy was bragging. Therefore, he narrowed his eyes and stared at Zhu Zi. He asked, "Zhu Zi, are you crazy? Otherwise, why would you say such nonsense? You're the one who's crazy." Zhu Zi slapped Hu Zi's head and said angrily, "Lao Tzu has a relative who works in the Zhang mansion. I heard this from my relative." This roar instantly attracted the attention of the passers-by. They all looked over. This street was not big, but it was not small either. People often saw each other, so Zhu Zi was also affected. The moment they saw Zhu Zi mention Principal Zhang, quite a few busybodies all gathered around, discussing animatedly. "Zhu Zi, what did you say about President Zhang? Did he go to heaven? Is he an immortal? I heard that people with the surname Zhang were reincarnations of immortals. Could it be that President Zhang is one too?" This brother's words were not groundless. The ancients had been pursuing the path of immortality since ancient times. Even ordinary people could not avoid it. Especially during the Sui, Tang, and Northern Song dynasties, due to the respect of the ruling class, Taoism was extremely prosperous and had a great influence on society. Taoism's philosophy, life-preserving techniques, spells, and regulations were also more perfect. As for why Zhang Feng was an immortal, this was the speculation of the common people. The source was the founder of Taoism, Zhang Daoling. Thinking about it, both of them had the same surname. Now that Zhang Feng had made such a divine object, the crowd could not understand for a while. Naturally, they connected all of this to Zhang Feng. They thought that this Zhang Feng might be the successor of Taoism, or even an immortal on earth. Of course, all of this was just the crowd's speculation and could not be confirmed. Zhu Zi saw that the crowd was getting more and more mysterious, and he could not help but feel satisfied. He glanced at Hu Zi from time to time, as if to say, "Look, even if you don't believe in Lao Tzu, there are plenty of people who do." Therefore, he scanned the crowd and continued, "I don't know if President Zhang is a god, but..." At this point he paused for a moment, as if he was deliberately whetting everyone's appetite. Looking at everyone's impatient look, his vanity seemed to have been greatly satisfied, and then he slowly said, "However, I heard that President Zhang not only went to Shenzhou to bomb the Turkic camp, but also personally went down to remove one of Shelly's big legs." Everyone's eyes widened. It was as if their breathing had stopped at this moment. At first, they had come with the mentality of watching a good show. After all, everyone was curious about the unknown. However, the more he heard, the more he felt that something was amiss. Motherfucker. Not only did President Zhang blow up the Turkic camp, she even personally charged into the Turkic camp and removed one of Shelly's legs. Initially, when they heard this, they still had a trace of doubt in their hearts. Although many of them had never met Zhang Feng, they had heard of him before. How could they have charged into the Turkic camp? However, looking at Zhu Zi's expression, they didn't think it was fake. In addition, this guy's usual behavior made it even more impossible. Therefore, everyone tacitly agreed in their hearts. Then they thought again. Who was Xieli? He was a hungry wolf on the grassland. Although he ascended the throne smoothly, which of the generals who could unify the grassland was not a fierce general, who could fight against 100 people alone? Could President Zhang charge into the Turkic camp? Unless this guy was really a god on earth? Actually, it was really possible. President Zhang had done so many things that humans couldn't do in the past. She might really be the reincarnation of a god. For a moment, everyone was skeptical. They believed that Zhang Feng was a god, but they didn't believe it. They believed it because this guy had done a lot of things that humans couldn't do. They didn't believe it because no one had really seen a god and only heard some legends. Now that this rumor suddenly appeared, no one could accept it. For a moment, complicated emotions intertwined in everyone's mind. They racked their brains but still couldn't get an answer. Finally, a teenager couldn't help but speak. He frowned and said, Zhu Zi, where did you hear this news from? Is it true? Don't make a fool of yourself? What he said was true. The streets of Chang'an were crowded. No matter who knew this explosive news, in less than 2 hours, no, in the time it took to burn a stick of incense, the whole Chang'an city would be abuzz. When Zhu Zi heard this, he was a little annoyed. Lao Tzu had talked for a long time, and you still have doubts. He stood up and glared at everyone. Does Lao Tzu look like a liar? To tell you the truth, I have a relative who works in the Zhang mansion. This news was spread by him. It's definitely first-hand and absolutely true. When everyone heard this, they looked at each other and suddenly understood. It turned out that the news was spread by the Zhang mansion. In that case, it was much more reliable. President Zhang really blew up the Turkic camp and took off one of Xieli's legs. If this was true, those Turkic bastards wouldn't dare to come to the Tang dynasty for a few years. This was great news for the Tang dynasty. Chapter 1911. President Zhang had become a hero of the Tang dynasty. In an instant, Zhang Feng's image in the hearts of the crowd grew. A few people even looked up at the sky, trying to find traces of the hero in their hearts. At this moment, Wuxia also believed in Zhang Feng's heroic deeds. Just now he was still doubting. Thinking about it, he really shouldn't have. He blushed and said, I really shouldn't have just now. I've decided to stay at home and worship President Zhang's memorial tablet every day. Before he finished speaking, Zhu Zi slapped him. Memorial tablets are for the dead. If you really respect President Zhang, then set up a deity tablet for President Zhang. Zhu Zi's words were originally unintentional, but it attracted a fierce reaction from the crowd. That's right. I also want to set up a deity tablet for President Zhang at home. I also want to set up one. A person like President Zhang deserves a deity tablet. Everyone raised their right hands and clenched their fists. The crowd was excited. They were all from Guangzhou, and the people of Guangzhou had always had a kind of belief that country first, home second. This kind of concept of sacrificing oneself for the country was incomprehensible to ordinary people. This was also the reason why Li Shimin had been recruiting soldiers in Guangzhou. And now, Zhang Feng had rushed into the Tujue camp alone and defeated Xieli. In their eyes, that was the performance of a great hero. They were never stingy to great heroes. Although they were all ordinary people and couldn't take out anything good, they could still offer offerings. So, as if they had discussed it, they all went home to prepare a deity tablet for Zhang Feng. As they walked, they also talked about Zhang Feng's heroic deeds. Soon the news spread. However, just as it spread, it caused a huge uproar on the streets of Chang'an. Because many people didn't believe that the thing flying in the sky a while ago was Zhang Feng. How could a person go up to the sky? This was simply nonsense. If anyone could go up to the sky, then wouldn't they become immortals? Towards these questions, Zhu Zi and the others were a little unhappy. They were people who firmly believed that Zhang Feng was in the heavens. Now that these questions were being asked, wasn't it a slap to their faces? Thus, Zhu Zi and the others started to argue with these people who didn't believe them. For a moment, the streets of Chang'an and were divided into two factions. One faction was led by Zhu Zi, who firmly believed that Zhang Feng could ascend to the heavens and attack the Turkic camp. The other faction was led by Fu Gongzi, who did not believe that Zhang Feng could ascend to the heavens. Actually, this was understandable. Many of these rich young masters didn't like Zhang Feng. Why do you have so much gold, silver, and treasures? You're also so talented, and you even have two beautiful wives. What about me? I don't have anything. When I get home, my father even compares me to you. Naturally, I feel unbalanced. However, Zhu Zi did not care about this. He pulled the crowd and scolded them. Things like President Zhang being able to ascend to the heavens and President Zhang being awesome. In any case, they just said whatever was amazing. The confidence of some of the rich young masters was greatly damaged. Some even couldn't take it and had to raise their hands and surrender. Only then did Zhu Zi give up and continue to promote Zhang Feng's glorious deeds. Zhang Feng, who was thousands of miles away, knew nothing about what was happening on the streets of Chang'an. At this moment, he was lying on the hot air balloon. His eyes were half closed, as if he was not asleep. Gusts of cold wind blew, causing him to shiver. Then he slowly opened his eyes and glanced down. What appeared in front of him was a yellow color, as if it was rendered by a painter's brush. It was a little blurry. He rubbed his eyes, trying to see everything clearly. Finally, a cold wind blew and took away a lot of yellow. He saw clearly that there was a desert below. Countless sand and gravel were rolling in the wind. He was a little confused and subconsciously asked, "Where is this? The desert?" Looking at the terrain in front of him, it should be the desert. However, wasn't he in Shenzhou? Why was he in the desert? What the F***ck was going on? He shook his head and tried to remember everything that happened in Shenzhou. After a while, the memory emerged bit by bit. It turned out that after blowing up the Turkic camp, a gust of wind blew the hot air balloon away. At that time, because the wind was too strong, the hot air balloon could not be controlled. They could only wait for death. In addition, they had not eaten and were already hungry. They all fell asleep and slept until now. These were nothing. However, they were now in the desert. Once they crossed the desert, they would be in the territory of the Turkic people. Now the Turkic people hated him to the bone. If he went there, he would die. Thinking of this, Zhang Feng could not sit still. He stood up and roared at Chang'an and the others. "You bunch of reckless dogs, get up quickly. We'll be in the grassland soon." Grassland? Zhang Sun was the first to wake up. He rubbed his eyes and looked at Zhang Feng with a little anger. He joked, "What grassland? Fengzi, are you crazy? Don't disturb me. I dreamed of eating drumsticks." After that, he turned his head and was ready to sleep again. Zhang Feng could not stand it. He went forward and slapped him. He said angrily, "Why are you still sleeping? If you continue sleeping, you'll die. Wake up quickly." Chapter 19:12. After beating up Zhang Sun, he rushed over. It seemed that he was still angry, and he beat up Cheng Chimo and Du Go who were sleeping. "Fengzi, are you crazy?" Cheng Chimo rubbed his sleepy eyes and blurted out. He was already hungry, and he had just eaten braised meat in his sweet dream, but he was woken up by this guy. He was naturally dissatisfied. As for Du Go, he was clearly still sleeping and enjoying. How could he have expected to be woken up? He originally wanted to curse, but when he opened his eyes and saw that it was Zhang Feng, he was a bit scared. He could only timidly ask, "Fengzi, what are you doing? I just saw the entrance to the lovely spring brothel, and I haven't entered yet." Hearing this, Zhang Feng was furious. At this time, these dogs were still thinking about eating, drinking, whoring, and gambling. Thus, he pointed at the sky and angrily glared at everyone. He scolded, "You dogs only know how to eat and drink all day. Who knows where we're floating now? Hurry up and think about how we're going to get back." When these words came out, everyone instantly became spirited. Because they had been sleeping all this time, they really didn't know where they were floating. However, looking at Fengzi's current expression, it seemed very serious. They didn't hesitate and leaned over the railing to check. It didn't matter when they looked, but their legs seemed to not listen to them, and all of them went limp. Where was this? Why was there a patch of yellow everywhere? And there was a sky full of yellow sand? Was the ground also full of sand? They seemed to have never seen this place before. They sat on the hot air balloon, feeling waves of powerlessness coming from their bodies. After a while, Chang'an seemed to have recovered. He looked at Zhang Feng and asked anxiously, "Fengzi, where are we? How did we float here?" When these words came out, Zhang Sun and Du Go also seemed to have calmed down. They nodded in unison. "Fengzi, what's going on?" Looking at everyone's appearance, Zhang Feng wanted to laugh. Weren't they all very tough just now? Why were they scared now? He originally wanted to scare them, but when he saw the situation in front of him, he decided against it. Thus he said with a serious face, "This should be the desert. In other words, we are only one step away from the grassland." Great desert. Everyone looked at each other in confusion. They didn't know much about the desert, but when they heard that it was only a step away from the grassland, they couldn't help but shiver. One had to know that beyond the desert was the grassland, and the grassland was the hinterland of the Turks. And he had just blown up the Turkic camp. If he went over now, wouldn't he be sending himself to his death? Thinking of this, everyone quivered and looked at Zhang Feng. "Fengzi, hurry up and think of a way. If we continue to drift in that direction, we will definitely die." Zhang Feng was originally thinking of a solution, but after being called, he panicked a little. He glared at everyone. "What's the rush? Do you want to die? If you don't think of a way, you'll really die." Chang'an looked at everyone and said anxiously, "Now that we are all in the desert, hurry up and think of a solution." Okay, I know." Zhang Feng waved his hand impatiently. In fact, he didn't have any good ideas. When the hot air balloon was successfully made, it didn't have the function of turning. It could only change its direction slightly with the weight, so some sandbags were placed. However, there wasn't any wind now. Even if he threw the sandbags, it would be useless. What should he do? Just as he was deep in thought, a warm wind blew. It was as gentle and delicate as a baby's hand. He suddenly trembled as if he felt a vitality. He quickly raised his hands and carefully felt the direction of the wind. This seemed to be blowing in the direction of Chang'an. That's right, it was the direction of Chang'an. With this wind, they could return to Chang'an. This made him overjoyed. He quickly said to everyone, "Hurry up and throw down all the useless things on the hot air balloon." The only way now was to use this wind to return to Chang'an. However, the weight on the hot air balloon would increase the wind resistance, so the best way was to throw away all the useless things and return to Chang'an, and as quickly as possible. However, Chang'an and the others didn't seem to understand. They looked at Zhang Feng with a confused face. "Why should we throw it away? How many steamed buns are there?" As he spoke, he walked to the package as if he was going to look for the so-called steamed buns. "You dog!" Zhang Feng stepped forward and kicked Chang'an. He glared at him and said angrily, "The wind is blowing towards Chang'an now. If you don't throw away these useless things when the wind stops, Lao Tzu will throw you down." Chang'an didn't get angry because Zhang Feng kicked him, because he heard something more important. The wind was blowing towards Chang'an? Didn't that mean he could return to Chang'an? Thinking of this, he quickly called Zhang Sun and the others. "You two come quickly. Didn't you hear what Fengzi said? This wind is blowing towards Chang'an. Quickly throw these things down." After that, he didn't care what was in the package and threw it down. Chapter 1913. Zhang Sunchong and Du Go were not to be outdone. They stepped forward and quickly cleaned up the hot air balloon. All of a sudden, the hot air balloon rose a few meters as the heavy objects were thrown down. At this time, another gust of wind hit. The hot air balloon began to sway with the wind and drifted toward Chang'an. Chang'an was so happy that he jumped up and down. He seemed to have forgotten that he was hungry. "Fengzi, how long will it take for us to return to Chang'an, and like this?" He missed the braised meat, roasted chicken, good wine, and the girls in the brothel in Chang'an, and very much. He couldn't wait to go back to Chang'an. The days in the hot air balloon were really not for humans. There was nothing he wanted, not even a bottle of wine. There were only a few men, and they had stayed there for a few more days. If they stayed there for a few more days, he reckoned that he would be driven crazy. He was not the only one who had this thought. Du Go and Zhang Sunchong also had this thought. Especially Zhang Sunchong. This guy was used to wandering around Chang'an city. He ate, drank, and gambled every day. Although he had changed after meeting Zhang Feng, after experiencing life and death this time, he missed Chang'an even more. He didn't miss anything else, but the girls in the brothel. Without me, you must have had a hard time. Don't worry, when I go back this time, I will make it up to you. Thinking of this, his face was full of lewd smiles. Zhang Feng scoffed at all of this, especially when he saw the lewd smiles on everyone's faces. He felt a chill run down his spine. Alright, stop having lewd thoughts. I reckon we'll be back in Chang'an in less than 2 days. If the wind gets stronger, it'll be even faster. When everyone heard this, they seemed to be more excited and cheered. The sky seemed to have heard everyone's cheers. A gust of wind blew again, and this time the wind was stronger than the previous one. The hot air balloon kept floating in the air and sped up. Soon, they were out of the desert. Sure enough, as Zhang Feng said, the speed increased when the wind was stronger. A day later, they saw the outline of Chang'an city. This time, Chang'an was surprisingly diligent. He did not sleep. When he saw that Chang'an was already in sight, he quickly patted the sleepy Zhang Feng. Fengzi, we're almost at Chang'an. Wake up quickly. Zhang Feng turned over and ignored Chang'an. He thought to himself, since we've arrived, why are you making such a fuss? Seeing that Zhang Feng did not respond, Chang'an woke up Zhang Suncheng and Do Go. When the two of them heard that Chang'an was here, they immediately stood up and surrounded the railing to admire the scenery of Chang'an. At this moment, they felt that the scenery in Chang'an had never been so beautiful. There was no other reason. This was how they felt after surviving a disaster. People were like this. When there was no danger, they would always feel that everything around them was not pleasing to the eye. However, once they experienced life and death, they would instantly feel that everything around them was so beautiful and even precious. Now the three of them had such thoughts. They had experienced what they thought was life and death. Now looking at Chang'an was a new scene. It was as if they thought that Chang'an was their mother, and they had finally returned to their mother's embrace. They looked at each other, and their throats twitched. They hugged each other tightly, as if they were about to cry. At this moment, the hot air balloon suddenly swayed and began to descend rapidly. The three of them seemed to have noticed that something was wrong. They quickly let go and leaned over the railing to look down. It did not matter if they looked down. A strong gust of wind blew from below. It was as if air was being pumped into their faces, causing their faces to distort. Chang'an quickly reached out to steady his face and continued to look down. However, he only saw the surrounding clouds. The objects underground seemed to be moving faster. This scared him out of his wits. He quickly shouted, "Hurry up and think of a way. What do we do now?" After saying that, he strode toward Zhang Feng. However, he realized that he had only taken half a step when his body tilted. He could only shout at Zhang Feng, "Fengzi, hurry up and think of a way." Zhang Feng had not been asleep all this time. He had also noticed the swaying just now. His first reaction was that there was a problem with the hydrogen. His mind was working quickly. Chang'an shouted, which made him angry. "You are so damn noisy." Halfway through his words, there was a whoosh. The hot air balloon suddenly shriveled. Everyone's expression changed because they all knew that the hot air balloon was supported by the air inside. Now that the air had leaked, wasn't that? Therefore, they quickly grabbed the iron wire and tried to find a way to survive. However, how could they withstand the pressure of the descent? The feeling of weightlessness suddenly hit them. Everyone fell to the ground. For a moment, screams were heard everywhere. It was as if the silent sky had been composed into a wonderful movement. Chang'an looked panicked. He stretched out his arm and tried to grab Zhang Sun to give himself some buffer. Zhang Sun was not stupid. He stretched out his arms. Then Dugo also stretched out his arms. The three of them hugged each other tightly. Zhang Feng was the last to descend. Therefore, he was above the three of them. When he saw the three of them hugging each other tightly and ignoring him, he was instantly furious. He did not care about his unrecognizable face and shouted, "Bastard, wait for me." Chapter 1914. Due to the airflow and pressure, Zhang Feng's voice was a little hoarse. Fortunately, the three of them still heard him. They reached out and hugged each other tightly. The speed of their descent became faster and faster. Everyone could only feel the cold wind cutting across their faces like knives. As they cried out in alarm, they were getting closer and closer to the ground. At that moment, they closed their eyes tightly, not daring to look down. It was not because they did not dare to look, but because the wind resistance was too strong. They could not open their eyes at all. Finally, a loud bang was heard, and pain spread through everyone's body. Zhang Feng slowly opened his eyes. He rubbed them and scanned his surroundings. It seemed like they had landed, but why did he not feel any pain? He looked down in confusion and saw Chingchumo and the other two with their tongues out, and their heads tilted to the side. They seemed to have fainted. Ah! Zhang Feng exclaimed and quickly jumped down from the three of them. Standing on the ground, he realized that the three of them were stacked in the shape of a human pyramid. The unlucky Dugo was at the bottom, Zhang Sun was in the middle, and Chingchumo was at the top. Not only that, but the appearance of these three fellows had also changed. Their originally fair and clean faces were now bruised and swollen. Their clothes were also full of holes. The good thing was that they still had some haystacks under them. With these haystacks they should not die, right? But it was not safe. Falling from such a high altitude, who knows, he could not stand still anymore. He quickly went forward and shook them violently. Iron Bull de Bing Worm, don't die. Don't die. After saying that, he seemed to have thought of something and quickly reached out to check their breathing. Yes, there was still some breathing. This meant that they were not dead yet. However, why was his breathing so short? Could it be that they were about to stop breathing? His expression changed as he hurriedly roared. As he roared, he shook his head. Iron Bull, don't die. If you die, that damn father of yours won't let me off. And de Bing, although you're stupid, I can teach you. Don't die. And Buggy, didn't you say you were going to bring me to the brothel? Don't King die. He didn't know if Zhang Feng's roar had an effect, or if these three guys were really lucky, but they actually had a reaction. Chimo was the first to open his eyes. He frowned as if he felt something was wrong. He subconsciously placed his right hand on his waist and cried out in pain. My waist. As soon as he finished speaking, Zhang Sun also woke up. The veins on his forehead were bulging, and he was a little out of breath. Trembling, he said, Is it that bastard is holding down Lao Tzu? Hearing this, Chimo subconsciously looked down, and saw that he was on top of Zhang Sun. He couldn't help but blush. Bug, it's me. It's you. Zhang Sun turned his head and glanced at him from the corner of his eye. He said angrily, Then why aren't you King coming down? Don't you know how heavy you are? Oh, Chimo then nodded. Just as he was about to move his feet, he felt a sharp pain in his waist, which made it difficult for him to move. He glanced in front of him and saw Zhang Feng watching the show. He said angrily, Fengzi, you're King watching the show? Hurry up and help me down. Zhang Feng smiled and quickly went forward. He chose to ignore Chimo's scolding. After all, this guy was his human punching bag just now. Moreover, now was the time to save someone. How could he have the time to care about this? Chimo was carefully helped down by Zhang Feng. He sat down on the side. Zhang Sun felt a little better. He looked at Zhang Feng and said, Fengzi, help me up too. My waist can't take it anymore. Speaking of this, he seemed to have thought of something. He asked, Where's that bastard Dabing? Zhang Feng chuckled and tilted his head. Isn't he just below you? Zhang Sun Chong frowned and glanced down. It really was Dugo. Dugo was still unconscious. His face was bruised and his blood vessels were popping. It looked like he had been pressed down. Zhang Sun saw this and his expression changed. He quickly asked, How did Dabing end up like this? He's not dead, is he? He shouldn't be dead, right? Zhang Feng went forward and looked at Dugo. Then he looked at Zhang Sun and said jokingly, If you continue to press him down, he might die. Ah! Zhang Sun exclaimed and grabbed Zhang Feng's shoulder. Quick, help me up. Zhang Feng smiled and quickly helped Zhang Sun Chong up. Only then did Dugo, who was at the bottom, return to normal. Fengzi, go take a look at Dabing. Zhang Sun stood at the side and looked at Dugo worriedly. As soon as he said this, Zhang Feng instantly felt that there was true affection between these brothers. It could be seen from this trip to Shang State. However, just as he was about to save Du Go, Zhang Sun and Cheng Chimo's discussion came from behind him. If this kid dies, who will pay for our next visit to the brothel? Oh, that makes sense. It was obvious that Cheng Chimo was the one who had spoken the truth. Chapter 1915. Zhang Feng turned around and glared at the two before patting Du Go's pale face. "De Bing, wake up. Otherwise, these two bastards will take your money and go to the brothel." Brothel? What brothel? Du Go slowly opened his eyes and looked at Zhang Feng in confusion. "What do you mean by that?" Zhang Feng smiled. He knew that this guy would wake up once he mentioned the brothel. As expected, he chuckled. "Hurry up and get up." After that, he went forward to support Du Go and prepared to pull him up. Na Cheng's face changed when he thought of this guy. He cried out in pain. "Ouch, ouch, ouch. My waist is broken." He was the one at the bottom of the human pyramid, so naturally, he was under the most pressure. His waist was probably not feeling well at all. Zhang Feng understood, but it was impossible for him not to get up. He still persuaded him. "Chang'an City is just ahead. Don't tell me you don't want to go home?" As soon as he said that, Du Go seemed to be instantly energized. He glanced at the city gate and pretended to be strong. "Go home. I can do it. Help me up." Zhang Feng smiled. This guy was obviously not that strong, yet he was still pretending. However, his actions were praiseworthy. Without any hesitation, he helped Du Go to sit beside Cheng Chimo and the other man. As soon as they stood still, the three of them seemed to have found something funny. They pointed at Zhang Feng and laughed. This made Zhang Feng confused. Could it be that his clothes were also torn? He quickly checked and found that his clothes were indeed torn. However, he could still wear them. Compared to these three guys, he was much better. He said unhappily, "You guys still have the face to laugh at me. Look at your clothes." The three of them finally reacted. They had been thinking about how to escape, and did not look at their appearances. Now that they looked at them, they were really F***ing ugly. Each of them had a bloody nose and a swollen face. There were even straws on their heads. They were just like clowns. In fact, Zhang Feng himself was not much better. Most of his clothes were torn, and there was a lot of straw on his head. However, he was not bruised and swollen. After all, he was at the top. After a burst of laughter, Zhang Feng looked at them and said seriously, "Chang'an City is close at hand. Let's walk there. I'll treat your injuries when we reach the Zhang mansion." Cheng Chimo nodded. "No problem. Let's go." Just as he was about to get up, a sharp pain came from his disappointing waist. "Ouch, my waist." Du Go was the same. Just as he was about to get up, pain came from his waist. He wailed, "My waist hurts." Zhang Suncheng was a little better. He was in the middle, so his strength was neutralized. His waist was fine, but it was a little sore. Therefore, he looked at the two of them with a mocking expression. "You two want to visit a brothel in your current state? I'm afraid you can't even move." Cheng Chimo and Du Go were unhappy. Their faces turned red. They were about to refute when they saw Zhang Suncheng standing between them. He crossed his arms and said proudly, "Look, you still have to rely on Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu will help you back." Cheng Chimo and Du Go wanted to curse, but when they saw Zhang Suncheng helping them, they did not say anything. They just lowered their heads and tried to stand up. Zhang Feng could not stand by and watch. He helped Cheng Chimo and Du Go up and walked towards Chang'an City. Although the two of them had a sore waist, they were usually in good health. Plus, they wanted to go home quickly. Soon they reached Chang'an Avenue. However, as soon as they reached Chang'an Avenue, they heard some unusual things. They claimed that Principal Zhang had ascended to the heavens and had personally charged into the Turkic camp. There were even some who claimed that Principal Zhang was the reincarnation of a god. There were also some fellows who claimed that Principal Zhang could predict the future and would soon ascend to the heavens. Hearing all this, Zhang Feng's head was about to explode. When did he become so awesome? Reincarnation of an immortal? Pass away and ascend in 100 days? Lao Tzu did not want to die. Who was spreading rumors about Lao Tzu? With doubts and anger, Zhang Feng stopped a passerby and asked, "Brother, Why are there rumors about me everywhere in Chang'an City? Who spread them? Rumors about you? The passerby exclaimed. He looked Zhang Feng up and down and said disdainfully, "Do you think you are President Zhang? Do you think a beggar like you can pretend to be President Zhang? An immortal on earth? Ha!" The passerby secretly spat and left. Zhang Feng was confused. The whole Chang'an city was spreading rumors about him. How could he pretend not to know a living person in front of him? Was this guy blind? Or was he really blind? Just as he was thinking hard, Cheng Chimo's joking voice came. "Come on, look at you now. It's already an honor for people to treat you as a beggar." Zhang Feng suddenly understood. He looked down at his clothes and was speechless. Sure enough, it was human nature to judge people by their appearance. However, he was not such a vulgar person. He looked at Cheng Chimo unconvinced. "Lao Tzu is a beggar. Aren't you? Why are you talking about this?" Chapter 1916. Lao Tzu is just angry. Cheng Chimo snorted and turned his head to the side. "It was the four of us who went to bomb the Turkic camp. Why did you become the hero when we came back? Why didn't anyone care about Lao Tzu and his brothers?" Zhang Sunchong and Du Go also reacted. They raised their heads to express their dissatisfaction. "Yes, we also contributed. Why didn't we get the same treatment?" Zhang Feng laughed. "It was Lao Tzu who made the hot air balloons, and the gunpowder was also Lao Tzu. When he asked you guys to bomb the Turkic camp, you were all acting like cowards. It was Lao Tzu who held you back. Now, you even turned around and said that Lao Tzu was wrong? It was really King embarrassing him." Thinking of this, he was unhappy. He frowned and glared at the crowd. "All of you shut up and stay here." After saying that, he ignored the crowd and quickly stepped forward to stop another passerby. However, this time he was smarter. He did not consider himself as Zhang Feng. Instead, he asked humbly, "Brother, when I first came here, I heard everyone talking about President Zhang. They even said that President Zhang is some kind of god. What is going on?" The passerby glanced at Zhang Feng. Seeing his tattered clothes, he thought that he was a beggar and did not want to answer. However, when President Zhang was mentioned, he seemed to be interested. He pretended to be knowledgeable and said, "If you want to talk about President Zhang, there is a lot to talk about." Back then, President Zhang ran a tavern by himself. At that time, he could not make ends meet and his life was extremely difficult. Hearing this, Zhang Feng was a little speechless. What did he mean by he could not make ends meet? Lao Tzu was not poor at that time, was he? Now he could roughly imagine that the rumors in Chang'an City were spread by these troublemakers. He wanted to curse, but when he thought of the source and the explosive news behind it, he felt as if his blood was boiling. Being praised by others doesn't seem to be a bad thing, right? Iron Bull and the others didn't even have the chance to be praised. Yes, that was the logic. When others didn't know who he was, it felt so good to hear them flatter him. He comforted himself. He purposely pretended to be humble and listened carefully. Looking at Zhang Feng, the passerby's vanity seemed to be greatly satisfied. He deliberately coughed twice and said with a serious face, "As for who was the first to talk about President Zhang in Chang'an City, I really don't know. After all, there are so many people in Chang'an City. There's no way to find out. But this discussion started a day ago. Also, I heard that President Zhang is an immortal. It's true. Many people in Chang'an City have worshipped President Zhang." "What?" Zhang Feng exclaimed in disbelief. "Worship the deity position? How is this possible?" The deity position was for immortals. He never thought that the people in Chang'an City would be so crazy. The passerby seemed to be very satisfied with Zhang Feng. He looked at Zhang Feng as if he were a country bumpkin. "You don't know about this, do you? People in Guangzhou are bellicose. President Zhang bombed the Turkic camp this time. In the eyes of the people in Guangzhou, he is a great hero. Also, speaking of this, he turned his head and looked around. When he saw that there was no one, he slowly approached Zhang Feng with a mysterious face. "Today, I heard that a woman from the Wang clan in Dong City became pregnant after worshipping President Zhang's deity position. You know, this woman from the Wang clan hasn't been pregnant for 3 years. It's all thanks to President Zhang that she is pregnant now." Zhang Feng was stunned. He stood there and didn't know what to say for a moment. Damn it! What did the woman's pregnancy have to do with Lao Tzu? And a woman who hasn't been pregnant for 3 years? This had nothing to do with Lao Tzu. Did these guys think that he was a child giving guanyin? At this moment, he felt that his head was in a mess. He could only hear a buzzing sound. But at this moment, the passerby leaned over again and said with a smile, President Zhang is so awesome. When I go back, I'm going to let my wife have a try. Maybe she can make my family have children. After that, he turned and was about to leave. Suddenly, he thought of something. He took out several copper coins from the bag and counted them in his palm. He took out several coins and was about to give them to Zhang Feng when he felt that something was wrong. He simply handed them to Zhang Feng and said, I'm happy today. Take the money and go drink with your brother. Zhang Feng was already petrified in place. He didn't react at all to what was happening in front of him. When the passerby saw that the beggar didn't react, he thought that he had made the beggar stupid. He simply grabbed Zhang Feng's right hand and stuffed all the money into it. Then he flicked his sleeves and left. Zhang Feng was stunned. Cheng Chimo and the others behind him heard everything clearly. They looked at each other and wanted to laugh. But when they thought that Zhang Feng was still standing there in a daze, they went forward and patted Zhang Feng's shoulder. Fengzi, are you okay? Zhang Feng trembled violently, only then did he recover. What the passerby said just now really made him speechless. How could a woman's pregnancy be related to Lao Tzu? Wasn't this normal? He wanted to vomit blood. He really felt that the people of Chang'an were crazy. Chapter 1917. Fortunately, Lao Tzu's willpower was strong. Otherwise, he would have fallen to the ground. He looked at Cheng Chimo and the others in confusion. He was a little speechless. What does a woman's pregnancy have to do with Lao Tzu? He did not know if these guys heard him, but he wanted to find someone to confide in. He wanted to say that this had nothing to do with Lao Tzu. However, Cheng Chimo revealed a meaningful smile and said, This is a good thing. You have now become the child giving guanyin. The people worship you. Speaking of this, he smiled slyly. In the future, our family will worship you. Maybe you can give birth to our family. Ah. That's right. Our family will worship you too. Huh. Zhang Sunchong and Du Go also expressed their opinions and laughed loudly. There was nothing wrong with what they said, and there was even a trace of respect. However, in Zhang Feng's ears, it was slowly mocking. He clenched his fists and glared at the three. You bastards dare to make fun of Lao Tzu. Take this. After saying that, he swung his fist and greeted them. The three of them had more or less injuries on their bodies. How could they withstand Zhang Feng's sudden attack? With a roll, they fell to the ground. Of course, Cheng Chimo was not someone to be trifled with. How could he endure this kind of grievance? Lao Tzu painstakingly accompanied you to Xingzhou, and you still want to hit Lao Tzu? Naturally, he could not take this lying down. Even though his waist hurt, he still wrestled with Zhang Feng. Moreover, there was also Zhang Sunchong and Du Go. Soon, the four of them wrestled together and rolled on the ground. The passers-by saw that there was a show to watch and stopped to look. Yo, where are these child beggars from? Why are they fighting on the street? Looking at their clothes, they should be from Chang'an. Look at the copper coins scattered on the ground. They should be fighting over the copper coins, right? This brother's words are reasonable, but these child beggars are really pitiful. Why don't you all be generous? Everyone was discussing animatedly. Many of them felt pity for Zhang Feng and the others and even threw down copper coins. There were even many busybodies who clapped and cheered, afraid that the scene wasn't spectacular enough. Finally, the four people who were rolling on the ground noticed that something was wrong. They stopped fighting and looked at the crowd in confusion. However, these guys didn't seem to have any intention of leaving. Instead, they started to point and whisper. Why aren't you fighting anymore? Did Lao Tzu just pay? Continue, I'm about to place my bets. Upon hearing these words, Zhang Feng was instantly infuriated. He stood up abruptly and pointed at the crowd. Get lost immediately. If you guys want to watch others fight, go see Old Wang next door. Cheng Chimo and the others could not stand it anymore. They trembled as they supported each other and scolded the busybodies. You bastards, did you not have a mother to teach you? Later, Lao Tzu will lead the troops to kill you all. When the crowd heard this, they wanted to refute. However, when they saw the clothes of Zhang Feng and the others, they shook their heads and remained silent. These child beggars were actually boasting shamelessly here? It seemed that they had been beaten silly just now. They didn't seem very smart now. After thinking about it, there was no need to argue with these child beggars. Everyone flicked their sleeves and left. Seeing that everyone had left, Zhang Feng glanced at Chingchumo and the others. He snorted coldly and walked toward the Zhang mansion. Chingchumo was a little embarrassed. If he went home in this state, he would probably be scolded by his father. Then he would be hung up and beaten. He would say that he was ruining the family's reputation and insulting the Chung family. Zhang Sun and Du Go were similar. Both of them were young masters of aristocratic families. If they went home in this state, they would be laughed at by others. How could they raise their heads in Chang'an and in the future? After thinking about it, the three of them decided not to go home. They followed Feng Zi to the Zhang mansion. This kid had brought them to Xingzhou. Now that he was in this state, he wanted to run away? No way. Therefore, the three of them followed Zhang Feng's footsteps and walked toward the Zhang mansion. Zhang Feng didn't care so much at first. He flicked his sleeves and walked forward. However, the more he walked, the more he felt that something was wrong. He realized that someone was following him. When he turned around, he saw that it was these three guys. Therefore, he stopped and looked at the three of them with a mocking expression. Why are you three following Lao Tzu? Weren't you very good at beating Lao Tzu just now? Chingchumo was already unhappy. When he heard this, he pouted. Who said that Lao Tzu is following you? It's not like your family built this road. Tisk. Zhang Feng looked at him with disdain and turned to walk toward the Zhang mansion. He knew in his heart that these guys didn't dare to go home for the time being. They could only follow him. However, they were unwilling to admit defeat. However, was Lao Tzu someone who would admit defeat? If you want to follow, then follow. When we reach the Zhang mansion, let's see how Lao Tzu will deal with you. They didn't speak along the way. Finally, they arrived at the Zhang mansion. When he saw the plaque of the Zhang mansion, Zhang Feng instantly felt a sense of belonging to his home. A warm feeling arose in his heart. It was still that familiar place. It was still those familiar voices. He felt like crying. Lao Tzu had suffered so much outside. He was finally back. However, he still held it in. He couldn't drop the ball in front of these guys. He sorted out his emotions and strode toward the door. He thought that he would be able to eat braised meat, chicken drumsticks, and other delicacies soon. Chapter 1918. Just as he was immersed in his beautiful fantasy, a shout pulled him back to reality. Stop! Where did this child beggar come from? Why are you begging at the Zhang residence? Zhang Feng frowned. It was normal for people to call Lao Tzu a child beggar. After all, many of them had never seen him before. Why would someone call Lao Tzu a child beggar in the Zhang residence? Were they blind or did they take the wrong medicine? He stared at the source of the voice and saw two servants in the Zhang residence's uniform glaring at him arrogantly. This made him furious. He frowned and scolded. Are you blind? You don't even recognize Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu is your master. Master? The two servants looked at each other in confusion. This was clearly a child beggar. How dare he say he was their master? How dare he? The leader of the servants stood out and took out a stick from his sleeve. He frowned and said, You dare to impersonate our master? Do you not know how to write the word death? Feng Zi almost fainted when he heard this. Not only did these people not recognize him, but they also dared to take out a stick? What were they trying to do? Beat Lao Tzu? Just as he was about to step forward, Chingchumo jumped out and pointed at the servant. He stared at him and said, Open your dog eyes and see clearly. Is this really your master? He did not want to help Feng Zi, but it was not good for him to just stand there. Moreover, if he was recognized by someone familiar, the Chung family would lose face. However, the servant did not buy it. He only thought that these people were child beggars and started arguing again. Just like that, Chingchumo and the servant quarreled. Their voices could be heard throughout the Zhang residence. Not long after, the scolding attracted a large group of people from the Zhang residence. The leader was Du Ziting. He led a group of servants and walked out aggressively. "Who is it? Who is impersonating our master?" He stood at the door and glanced at the crowd, glaring angrily. When the servant saw the housekeeper come out, he quickly went forward and pointed at Zhang Feng. "Housekeeper, it's him. He said he's the master." Du Ziting frowned and looked at Zhang Feng. Her first reaction was that a child beggar dared to cause trouble here. However, the more he looked at him, the more he felt that something was amiss. Why did this person look so much like master? This figure, this standing posture, this face shape, how could there be someone so similar in this world? Could this really be the master? However, on second thought, he felt that it was unlikely. Old master had such a huge family business, and was also the dean of White Deer College. How could he be dressed so shabbily? This person must have impersonated master because he looked like him. Yes, that must be it. Having made up his mind, he waved his hand. "Men!" At this moment, Zhang Feng's face instantly darkened. "Old Du, you bastard. Even you don't recognize Lao Tzu?" Hearing this, Du Ziting felt goosebumps all over her body. This voice. Why did it look so much like master? Thinking about it, Du Ziting took another look at Zhang Feng's appearance. In an instant, her legs went weak and she almost fainted. That voice belonged to master. Only master would call him Old Du in Chang'an City. Only master dared to call him that. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that something was amiss. He took a closer look and almost fainted. He looked exactly the same as old master. They were practically carved from the same mold. And this voice, this was a living example of old master. He could no longer remain calm. He came forward and looked at Zhang Feng. His voice trembled as he asked, "Master, are you really master? What do you think?" Zhang Fu waved his sleeves and stared at Du Ziting. Who else in Chang'an City dares to impersonate Lao Tzu? As soon as he said that, Du Ziting was sure that this was her master. Only master would speak to her like this. Only master could emit such a domineering aura. Therefore he hurriedly cheered, "Master, it's master, master is back." Before he could finish his sentence, Zhang Feng hurriedly stepped forward and covered Du Ziting's mouth. He widened his eyes and said, "Do you want the whole mansion to know that Lao Tzu is like this?" Du Ziting's mouth was covered, so she didn't react for a long time. Her eyes kept rolling until she saw Zhang Feng's tattered clothes. She suddenly understood and quickly nodded to show that she understood. Zhang Feng let go and snorted. "Prepare hot water immediately." Du Ziting nodded and quickly waved her hand to dismiss the servants. Then she welcomed Zhang Feng into the mansion. Cheng Chimo and the others saw Zhang Feng enter the mansion and quickly followed him. In the side hall, Du Ziting had already prepared hot water. Zhang Feng, Cheng Chimo, and the others ran in quickly, as if they were afraid that others would see them. Du Ziting was guarding the door. She looked around vigilantly and looked around from time to time. However, at this moment, Zhang Yuyao and Jingshu ran over with small steps. The two girls seemed to know what was inside. They didn't care that Du Ziting was guarding the door and were ready to rush in. This frightened Du Ziting. She hurriedly stopped the two girls. "Ladies, you are?" Zhang Yuyao glanced inside and said impatiently, "I just heard that a few beggars entered the mansion. What's going on? I also heard that master is back." Chapter 1919. Du Ziting quickly shook her head and put her hands on the door frame. "Beggar? What beggar? Why don't I know? Master just came back, but he's taking a bath and changing clothes now." Zhang Yuyao frowned. Just now, she clearly heard a servant say that master and a few beggars came back. Why wasn't there anyone now? She unwillingly glanced inside, but she didn't see anything. Jingshu just smiled and didn't say anything, because she had already guessed the gist of it from Du Ziting's expression. Perhaps this master was the child beggar. Master was so prideful. How could he let the housekeeper say it? After thinking for a while, she pulled Zhang Yuyao. "Sister Yuyao, the housekeeper is right. Since master is back, let's go to the hall and wait. We'll see in a while." After saying that, she didn't care about Zhang Yuyao's reaction, and pulled her to the hall. Zhang Yuyao was still confused. She looked back from time to time, but when she thought that Sister Jingshu's words were reasonable, she still walked to the hall. After a while, Zhang Feng finished washing up and walked to the hall. Zhang Yuyao rushed forward and hugged Zhang Feng, sobbing. Prince Zhang, do you know how worried we were about you these past few days? Jingshu actually also wanted to pour out her heart, but when she saw that there was no place for her, she could only stand there and cry in a low voice. Yes, Prince Zhang, if you didn't come back, we sisters didn't know what to do. Facing the two women's cries, Zhang Feng was a little helpless. He wanted to ask Chingchimo for help, but he saw this guy give him a look that said, "We're all men, we understand." So he gave up resisting and quickly persuaded. Don't cry, aren't I back now? There are so many people watching. Why don't you get up first? Hearing this, Zhang Yuyao seemed to have realized something. She looked up and saw many pairs of eyes staring at her. She couldn't help but blush. She reluctantly left Zhang Feng's embrace and wiped the tears from the corner of her eyes. Prince Zhang, why are you dressed like this? Was he injured? Have you been eating well recently? Zhang Feng was about to answer, but Chingchimo couldn't stand it anymore and interrupted. Sister-in-law, can you stop being so lovey-dovey? Our teeth are aching. If you have the time, hurry up and prepare some food for us. We're starving to death. Zhang Yuyao blushed and turned to look at Chingchimo, but she couldn't remember this person in her mind. She couldn't help but ask curiously, this is? Aya. Zhang Sun impatiently waved his hand. I'm Buggy, this is Tai Niu, and this is De Bing. Sister-in-law, hurry up and prepare some food. Also call a few doctors. Jingshu suddenly understood and smiled. Please wait for a moment, I'll go and prepare. After that, she looked at Zhang Feng meaningfully and turned to leave. Although she also wanted to chat with Prince Zhang, it was obviously not the time. Seeing Jingshu leave, Zhang Yuyao also bowed to everyone. Please wait here, I'll go and help Sister Jingshu. Du Ziting was also tactful. She probably guessed that the master and the young masters had something to say, so she casually found an excuse and left. After the three of them left, the hall became much quieter. But soon, the silence was broken by Chingchimo. He looked at Zhang Feng and showed an expression that all men understood. Fengzi, you're really lucky to have such a wife. If I, Tai Niu, had such a wife, I'd be willing to die. You still have the face to say that. Zhang Feng stared at Chingchimo and was a little angry. You dog, you really treated this place as your own home. If Lao Tzu didn't see that you were injured, he would have already cut off your arm. He was very angry that this guy was bossing him around in his own house. However, when he thought that this guy was still injured, he let it go. Moreover, this guy had helped him a little in Shenzhou. Otherwise, with his temper, he would have driven this guy out long ago. Chingchimo was a little disapproving. Fengzi, don't bite the hand that feeds you. Our injuries are all because of you. If it weren't for your hot air balloon, how could we be injured? Yes, if it weren't for your stupid hot air balloon, how could we be like this? Zhang Sunchong and Du Go seemed to have found a topic to vent their anger on, and they glared at Zhang Feng. In fact, it would have been better if these guys didn't mention it. Once they mentioned the hot air balloon, Zhang Feng was puzzled. The hot air balloon was clearly fine in the sky, and there was no problem all the way to Shenzhou. Why did it deflate when it returned to Chang'an? Moreover, it deflated very quickly. Before they could react, it had already landed. It was a little strange. At that time, he was sleeping and didn't notice too many problems. It seemed that he could only ask these guys. Therefore, he tried to put on a smiling face. What happened to the hot air balloon just now? Why did it deflate? You want to know? Chingchimo revealed a malicious smile. Seeing Zhang Feng nod, he joked. I won't tell you. Who told you to hit Lao Tzu? Just now he was quite good at hitting Lao Tzu. Now he wanted to fish for information? Impossible. Chapter 1920. Zhang Sun also acted as if he was watching a good show. If you want to know, you'll have to reward us later. Zhang Feng narrowed his eyes. He already knew that they didn't have good intentions. Sure enough, they were waiting for him here. However, was he someone who would admit defeat? He coldly snorted. I'll naturally treat you to good food and drinks later. However, you must immediately tell me everything that happened on the hot air balloon. Otherwise, Lao Tzu will immediately ask the Zhang residence's people to spread your scandal. At that time, let's see if you can still be so arrogant." Upon hearing this, Cheng Chimo's expression immediately changed. He was most afraid of his father. If his father knew that he had become a child beggar, wouldn't he be beaten to death? He quickly begged for mercy. "I said, please don't spread it. We are also people who care about our reputation." Yes. It won't do you any good to spread it." Du Go was also afraid. His family was very strict and was not inferior to the imperial family. If his father knew, he would lose a layer of skin. However, Zhang Feng was happy. He thought to himself, since these guys are so afraid, then Lao Tzu will have something to use against me in the future. Why say again? He couldn't care less. He smiled. Then quickly tell me. Originally, this smile didn't mean anything. However, in everyone's eyes, it was like a death knell. It harbored evil intentions and made people afraid. Cheng Chimo could only say, "Just now, when we were in the sky, I heard the sound of air leaking. At that time you were sleeping, so naturally you didn't have any reaction. I saw the hemp rope slowly breaking free from the sound of air leaking. Then, as he spoke, he spread out his hands. Then it became like this." After hearing this, Zhang Feng frowned. Originally, the hot air balloon this time wasn't very perfect. It could be said that it was the first generation. The previous ones were just experimental products. Even if it was the first generation, this time it was relatively successful. It was just that there was a leak just now. The leak should be because the seal wasn't tight enough, which allowed the hydrogen to leak out. It seemed that he had to find another way to seal the air vent tightly. Also, the direction of the hot air balloon this time was completely driven by the wind. He had to find a way to control the direction in the air. Otherwise, it would be very dangerous. This time, it had drifted to Shenzhou. Who knew where it would go next time? Now that he knew about this weakness, he had to find the time to reinvent it. However, this was obviously not the time to talk about this. Thus, he glanced at everyone. "Alright, I understand. This will definitely not happen again." Just as he finished speaking, Du Ziding and the two girls walked in together. "Prince Zhang, the bathwater is ready." Jingshu blushed and looked at Zhang Feng. Zhang Feng nodded and glanced at Cheng Chimo and the others. "Let's go and take a bath." After saying that, he turned around and walked out of the room. Cheng Chimo and the others followed closely behind. The shower was soon over, and the four of them changed into new clothes. At this time, the doctor was already waiting in the hall. The doctor picked up Cheng Chimo's arm and carefully examined it. His brows were sometimes knitted and sometimes relaxed. He didn't know what was going on. After about half an incense stick's time, the doctor let go of the arm and stroked his beard. The problem is neither big nor small. It's just that the lumbar bone is damaged. Wait for old man to prescribe some medicine. Take it first. I don't know if it's useful or not. Take it first." After saying that, the doctor didn't explain. He took out a pen and paper, and a dragon and snake flew around. However, Cheng Chimo panicked. Hearing the doctor's words, it seemed that he couldn't be saved. He hurriedly asked, but the doctor excused himself by saying that his medical skills were not good enough. After that, he took the pulse of Zhang Sunchong and Du Go. The conclusion was basically the same. The lumbar bone was damaged and needed to be recuperated. They couldn't stay calm anymore. They were about to ask the doctor, but unexpectedly, the guy ran away like a wisp of smoke. Cheng Chimo held the prescription in his hand and wanted to cry. It wasn't because of the doctor's words. After all, there weren't many in the Cheng family who were afraid of death. The injury on his waist wasn't fatal. It was because the doctor told him to avoid spicy food, avoid this and that. Most importantly, he couldn't touch women. Otherwise, the injury on his waist would worsen. How could he, one of the Chang and four tyrants, endure this? However, he couldn't ignore the doctor's words. Therefore, he decided to vent his anger on Zhang Feng. "Feng Zi, you mother****. Lao Tzu is like this now because of you. That bullshit doctor told Lao Tzu to avoid this and that and not to touch women. What do you think we should do? Yes. Zhang Suncheng also stood up and looked at Zhang Feng condescendingly. Lao Tzu's favorite drumstick is going to leave me. How are you going to compensate me? Du Go was naturally unwilling. He pointed at Zhang Feng and also attacked him. It was as if he didn't care about his back pain at all. As for Zhang Feng, he sat on the stool with a cigarette in his right hand. From time to time, he would take a puff. He was very satisfied. He was currently immersed in the stimulation of the cigarette and had no intention of replying to the three of them. Moreover, he could understand what the three of them said. After all, an injury wasn't a small matter. Moreover, it was an injury on his waist. That was even more so he didn't choose to refute. Moreover, what was the use of refuting? These three guys were more vicious than dogs. He had no chance of winning. Chapter 1921. When Cheng Chimo saw that Zhang Feng didn't respond, he became even fiercer. He gritted his teeth and said, Fengzi, don't King think you can just keep quiet. If Lao Tzu can't touch women, how can he carry on the family line in the future? At this point his expression changed, and he actually wanted to cry. That's not the most important thing. Lao Tzu can't eat barbecue or drink in the future. What should we do? Obviously, eating and drinking were his first priority, and carrying on the family line was second. Would old Qing beat him to death if he heard this? Du Go also had a bitter expression. Thinking that he wouldn't be able to eat what he wanted to eat in the future, he held back his tears and complained. My drumstick, my duck neck, my... Stop King quarreling. Zhang Feng suddenly stood up and interrupted the noise. He took a deep puff of his cigarette and spat out the smoke. He glanced at the crowd and scolded. Look at you guys. You're the King 4 hegemons of Chang'an. Isn't it just a little injury on your waist? It's not like you broke your waist. That doctor just now was obviously a quack. I'll personally find a few good doctors for you. For the next few days, you can eat and drink as much as you want. As long as you don't die, I can pull you back from the gates of hell. These are my words and no one can stop me. He wasn't bragging. He had a certain status in Chang, and so it was relatively easy for him to find some good doctors. In addition to the connections of his teachers, there was no doctor in the Tang dynasty that he couldn't find. Of course, that immortal son Simiao might not be easy to find, but ordinary doctors weren't a problem. After hearing Zhang Feng's words, the three of them felt reassured. However, there was still a trace of concern in their hearts. You're not lying to us, right? Zhang Feng took a deep puff of his cigarette and waved his hand. Think about it. With your IQ, do you think I can lie to you? The three of them nodded and secretly agreed. Indeed, there were three of them, and this guy was only one person. How could he lie to them? After lying to himself for a while, Cheng Chimo said, Then let's cut the crap and serve the hot pot. Lao Tzu is already hungry. Zhang Feng rolled his eyes at the guy and said to Du Ziting, Old Du, serve the hot pot. Du Ziting accepted the order and left. After a while, the servants brought in all kinds of ingredients. This made Cheng Chimo and the other two drool. Back then, when they were on the hot air balloon, they had nothing. When they finally found a few steamed buns, the four of them had to share them. This was the consequence of not bringing food. Of course, Zhang Feng did not think of this at that time. He thought that the hot air balloon would not float too far. Who would have thought that it would go to Xingzhou? Without saying anything more, everyone set up a fire and began to feed them. Not long after, the ingredients were cooked. Cheng Chimo and the others wolfed down the food. But this was hot pot. How could he eat it like that? The three of them were scalded to the point that they could only stick out their tongues. After a sumptuous feast, the four of them sat on the chairs and each lit a cigarette to enjoy the peace and quiet. Before they finished smoking, Jingshu and Zhang Yiyao walked in. Prince Zhang, greetings. The two women bowed to everyone. Seeing this, Zhang Feng straightened his clothes and quickly sat up. After all, this would damage his image, especially in front of the two women. Then he said seriously, What's wrong? Jingshu stepped forward and bowed. Since Prince Zhang is back, when will you go to Shao Mountain to visit the gentleman? This time, they were here to remind young Master Zhang to go to Shao Mountain. After all, the teachers had worked hard for young Master Zhang. It was said that their white hair had increased a lot. Now that they were back, if they didn't go and see the teachers, they would definitely be criticized by others. Although this was not important to others, it was extremely important to the Zhang residents because it was related to the reputation and direction of the Zhang residents. They could not be careless. As the future mistress of the Zhang residents, they naturally had to remind him. Zhang Feng naturally knew this in his heart. It was just that he had just returned and did not think about it. Now that he was suddenly reminded, he felt a little unnatural. This was his master, and he actually needed the two girls to remind him. He really should not have done that. After blaming himself, he said with a serious face, "Indeed, what you said is reasonable. I was not here for a few days, so my master must be very busy. I should pay him a visit." As he spoke, he raised his head and glanced outside the door. Seeing that the sun was setting in the west, he changed the topic. "It's already late. Let's go tomorrow morning. Send someone to Shao Mountain to pass on a message that I'm back." Jingshu thought for a moment, and felt that Prince Zhang's words were reasonable. She bowed. "Yes, young master." "What? Is there anything else?" Seeing that the two women did not leave, Zhang Feng could not help but ask. Jingshu nodded and continued. "A few days ago, Madame Xie came and brought a lot of dried flowers." "Madame Xie?" Zhang Feng thought about this name carefully and asked, "How many dried flowers did she bring? Did she report it? Did she pay?" He had previously made an agreement with this Madame Xie. As long as he did not ask, she would continue to send flowers. This could be considered as secretly helping the Xie family. Chapter 1922. Moreover, the dried flowers were related to perfume, and perfume was a new product. He dared not be careless. Jingshu also knew the importance of the matter. She took out an account book from her sleeve and handed it to Zhang Feng. "Young master, this is the account book. There are a total of 30 stones." Zhang Feng took the account book and looked at it carefully. Seeing that there was no problem, he closed the account book and handed it back to Jingshu. "Well, there is no problem. Tell old Du to take good care of the dried flowers. I will have great use for them in the future." Jingshu nodded. She seemed to have thought of something and said, "A few days ago Mr. Zihuai also came. He brought some news. He said that the teachers of the academy sent some servants to Shenzhou in order to find you." Hearing this, Zhang Feng couldn't help but feel a little touched. The teachers on the mountain really treated him well. They really did help him when he needed them. Especially the old Xiaocai. Although he usually did not show it, he knew that he was the one who cared about him the most. The old Xiaocai was usually lonely and had no one to rely on. Since he met him, he even treated him like a nephew. This kind of feeling could not be understood by others. Only he knew. Thinking of this, the corners of his eyes became wet. Zhang Yuyao seemed to have noticed something. She quickly took a handkerchief from the ground and said, "Prince Zhang, don't be sad." "Who said I was sad?" Zhang Feng tilted his head. He was not convinced. How could a man cry in front of a woman? So he waved his sleeve and wiped the corners of his eyes. He tried to be brave and said, "See, I said I am fine. You don't have to say anything." He thought that he had covered up all of this well. However, he did not know that the two women saw through all of this. They looked at each other and giggled. "Okay, don't laugh." Zhang Feng waved his hand. He felt that his face was a little hot. "Keep laughing and see how I will deal with you in the future." As soon as he finished speaking, the two women reluctantly agreed and waved their hands before leaving the room. After the two women left, Zhang Feng felt that someone was looking at him strangely. When he turned around, he saw Qing Chimo and the others smiling slyly. He was a little stupid. It was one thing for women to laugh at Lao Tzu, but they actually dared to laugh too? He stood up abruptly, pointed at the crowd, and said angrily, "What are you bastards laughing at?" "Nothing, nothing." The three of them shivered and hurriedly waved their hands. Just now, they had seen everything with their own eyes. They had no choice but to laugh. Who would have thought that a grown man would be like this? However, This fellow seemed to not allow others to laugh. He was even fiercer than a dog. Naturally, they didn't dare to say anything. Zhang Feng knew in his heart what these bastards were laughing at. However, if they did not want to admit it, there was nothing he could do. He could only scold. If Lao Tzu sees you laughing in the Zhang mansion in the future, Lao Tzu will spread your scandal throughout Chang'an city. After saying that, he waved his sleeves and turned around to leave. Only the dumbfounded crowd was left in the room. This was too domineering, wasn't it? He didn't allow them to laugh? However, after thinking about it, they were in the Zhang mansion and they were still injured. They could only endure it and teach this bastard a lesson in the future. Therefore, the three of them decided to swallow their anger. Without anyone to vent their anger, they could only find a guest room to rest. It was night. The sky was gray and not a single star could be seen. However, the Zhang mansion was brightly lit. The flames swayed under the veil, as if they were cheering for the return of the owner. The night gradually deepened. Small snowflakes began to float in the sky. Slowly, the snowflakes became bigger and bigger. The houses, flowers, and trees were all covered in a snowy white. The entire Zhang mansion became a world of silver and white. The servant on night patrol was holding a lantern with his hands tucked into his sleeves. From time to time he would shiver. When he stepped on the ground, creaking sounds could be heard from time to time. Behind him, there would always be a string of beautiful footprints. The wind blew gently, and the snow on the branches rustled and fell. The snowflakes danced in the wind like jade shavings. Winter in Guangzhou was like this. It was dry and cold. Once it started to get cold, it would make one's nose ache and head ache. Their feet were like 2 blocks of ice. Fortunately, everyone had fallen asleep. Tomorrow, they would be able to re-examine this snow-white world. The next day, with the crowing of roosters, the courtyard of the Zhang mansion was busy again. The servants needed to shovel the snow in the courtyard. Otherwise, it would be a big deal if a noble got up and fell. In the backyard, the Zhang mansion was woken up by the housekeeper. After washing up, he hurriedly ate breakfast and gathered in the main hall. He had important matters to attend to today. Thus, he had to explain to everyone in the main hall. He scanned the crowd and found that Chingchimo and the others were not present. He couldn't help but ask curiously, "Where are Tai Nyo and the others?" Du Ziting took a step forward and said awkwardly, "Master, the 3 young masters are still sleeping. These 3 pigs only know how to sleep all day." Zhang Feng secretly spat. He was a little angry, but after thinking about it, he realized that going up the mountain to see his teacher had nothing to do with them, so he felt relieved. He then said with a serious face, "Old Du, how is the gift that I prepared for my teacher?" Chapter 1923. Yesterday, he told Du Ziting that he would go to Mount Shao today to visit his teachers, so he needed to prepare some gifts. At first, he felt strange to prepare gifts. Mount Shao was his own place, and he had to give gifts when he went back. But on second thought, his teachers had been busy these days, and if he didn't prepare something, he would feel that he didn't value them. After thinking about it, he decided to prepare something. After all, there was no harm in being prepared. Du Ziting also knew the importance of this matter. She pointed to the gift boxes on the table and said, "Master, according to your instructions, each gift box contains old ginseng, tea leaves, and wine. There is no problem." Zhang Feng nodded. He knew that his teachers were experts who were not greedy for gold, silver, and jade, so he could only use these to cater to their liking. He hoped that they would like it. After saying that, he turned around and walked out of the door. But at this time, Jingshu grabbed Zhang Feng and pleaded, "Prince Zhang, let us sisters go with you." "Yes, Prince Zhang, we also want to go," Zhang Yuyao also said with a hopeful look. This made Zhang Feng confused. He asked, "I'm going to see my teachers. What are you going to do? And I will be back soon." Jingshu shook her head and said with a bitter face, "Prince Zhang, you don't know how we sisters survived when you were not here. We were worried that you would not come back after leaving. We have been looking forward to it for a long time, but you finally came back. Now that you are leaving, please take us with you. We were really worried that you would not come back." Zhang Feng looked at the 2 women affectionately. He didn't expect that the two women had such deep feelings for him, and were so worried about him. If he didn't take them with him now, he felt a little wrong. He had to say, "Okay, then let's go together." Hearing this, the two women were overjoyed. Du Ziding stood on the side and smiled without saying anything. Young people, she could understand. The carriage had been waiting outside for a long time. The group of people boarded the carriage and set off for Shao Mountain. This time he didn't bring too many people, only Zhang Yuyao, Jingshu and 5 servants. Because this was considered paying a visit to his master and thanking him for his kindness, there was no need for extravagance. Naturally, he didn't need to bring too many people. Soon, they arrived at Shao Mountain. The carriage stopped at the entrance of the academy. Zhang Feng poked his head out and felt a familiar smell. It was the smell of the mountains, mixed with the fragrance of countless flowers and trees. Even though it was winter and everything had withered, the academy was still thriving. This was the strength of the students. Wherever they were, it would always be filled with the aura of youth. After enjoying the wonderful feeling, he was about to get out of the car when he heard a series of exclamations. "Dean, the dean is back." Zhang Feng looked in the direction of the voice and saw a group of students calling him. There were quite a few of them, and there were some familiar faces among them, including Yun Ping, Qiu Ran, and the others. This made him a little confused. Why were there so many students here? Were they here to welcome him? Thinking of this, he was overjoyed. He tidied his clothes and walked out of the carriage. He smiled at the crowd and said, "Why are you all here?" Yun Ping stepped forward, scratched his head and smiled. "I know the dean is coming back today, so I came here to wait for you." "Waiting for me?" Zhang Feng was a little surprised. Even though he knew that these students were here to welcome him, he couldn't help but be surprised. However, he still had to put on a show to avoid disappointing them. Therefore, he said with a happy face, "I didn't expect you to be so considerate. You didn't waste my usual teaching." At this time, he didn't forget to brag about himself. The students were obviously happy to hear this. They smiled and felt a little embarrassed. After a round of laughter, Zhang Feng glanced at the crowd. "Let's go into the academy. You must be waiting for a long time, right?" Qiu Ran nodded. "You are already waiting for us at the dean's residence." After saying that, he took the initiative to step back. The students also stepped aside and made a path for Zhang Feng. The carriage slowly pulled behind them and drove towards the academy. After a while, the group of people arrived at the residence. The students dispersed, leaving only Zhang Feng and the others. Zhang Feng helped the two women out of the carriage and walked towards the residence. As soon as he opened the door, he saw the 4 teachers and the old elementary scholar sitting on the stool, not saying a word. Zhang Feng greeted them with a happy face. He bowed to his teachers one by one. "Hello, teachers." He originally thought that his teachers would be very happy when he came back and then invite him to have a candlelight talk. However, something unexpected happened. Yu Shinan shot to his feet and glared at her coldly. "You still remember to come back?" Zhang Feng was stunned. He thought that his teacher would be very happy. Why was he so angry? He didn't dare to answer. He quickly looked at the other teachers, wanting to ask for help. However, the other teachers were still sitting and looking at him coldly. It was as if they took everything for granted. Even the old elementary scholar was the same. What's wrong with these teachers? Chapter 1924. Why was he angry with him? Just as he was racking his brains, the old scholar stepped forward and said with disappointment, "Where did you go this time? Be honest and explain everything clearly." Zhang Feng frowned. He probably knew why his teacher was angry. When he was about to answer, Jingshu stood up. She bowed to the gentleman and said, "Gentlemen, Prince Zhang just came back. He is still injured. Can you let him sit down and talk?" "Injured?" Yu Shinan glanced at Zhang Feng. He was a little moved. In fact, he didn't mean to reprimand this student. In general, Fengzi did everything well. However, this incident made them very angry. A dean of the academy actually went to the war-torn Xingzhou? Wasn't he worried about his own safety? Thinking of this, his eyes became cold again. Even if he is injured, let him stand. Why? Do you want to intercede for him? Jingshu frowned and was a little dissatisfied. She didn't expect these gentlemen to be so strict. However, she didn't dare to refute and said, "I don't dare." Zhang Feng saw that the atmosphere was a little tense. He turned his head and glanced at the two girls. He said, "You two leave. Our teachers have something to say to me. You shouldn't stay here." Letting the two girls leave was for everyone's good. If the teachers scolded him later, it would be embarrassing. Zhang Yuya was a little unwilling and pouted. She was very worried about Prince Zhang. Moreover, she had heard of these gentlemen's reputation. They were famous for being strict. This time, Prince Zhang would inevitably be reprimanded for doing such a thing. Jingshu was obviously more sensible. Looking at the situation, she knew that she couldn't help much even if she stayed. She quickly pulled Zhang Yuyao and left in a hurry. Seeing the two girls leave, Zhang Feng bowed again. "Dear teachers, I know that I did something wrong this time. Please punish me." It was better to admit his mistake first than to ask. Maybe the teacher's punishment would be lighter later. However, he was wrong. The atmosphere in the arena did not ease because of his apology. Yu Shinan waved his sleeves and said coldly, "As the saying goes, a gentleman does not stand under a collapsing wall. Do you understand this principle?" Zhang Feng shuddered. He had never seen his teacher lose his temper like this. Moreover, it was directed at him. It seemed that he was really angry this time. He could only tremble as he said, replying to teacher, "This student understands. Since you know, why do you want to take the risk yourself?" Shueji stood up, pointed at Zhang Feng and scolded him. "Do you know what you're shouldering? You might not know, but today, old man will tell you." Speaking of this, he looked up at the roof and then at Zhang Feng. "You are shouldering the hopes of us old guys, the academy, and even the entire Tang dynasty. How can you put yourself in danger? What if something happens?" Zhang Feng was stunned. He did not expect his teacher to have such high expectations of him. In the academy and the entire Tang dynasty? This was a bit exaggerated, wasn't it? He could not afford it. However, in such a serious situation he had to bow and say, "Yes, teacher." "Well, I've finished my lecture. Let him tell us what happened this time." Chu Suiliang glanced at the crowd, then looked at Zhang Feng and said coldly, "Hurry up and tell us what happened this time." Zhang Feng nodded and thought for a while before he said, "The cause of this time is that I studied something that can go up to the sky. I called it a hot air balloon. Then I flew all the way to Chang'an, and in the hot air balloon. Originally, I did not plan to go to Shenzhou, but at that time, the hot air balloon was a little out of control, so I flew all the way to Shenzhou. Since I arrived in Shenzhou and there were Turks stationed there, I wanted to give them a blow, lest they come to the Tang dynasty and loot. This is also a temporary solution for the people of the Tang dynasty." His words were half true and half false. The main purpose was to calm down the anger of his teachers. Obviously, the effect was achieved. Yu Shinan stroked his beard and asked curiously, "Is your hot air balloon so magical? Can it really go up to the sky?" Of course. Zhang Feng was excited and a trace of pride flashed in his eyes. "At that time, we took the hot air balloon to Shenzhou. If you are interested, you can have a try in a few days." Well, Yu Shinan's eyes lit up. "We can have a try too?" As soon as he finished speaking, he felt something was wrong. It seemed that he had been fooled by this guy. He quickly waved his sleeve and said, "Don't try to divert old man's attention. Now we are talking about your private trip to Shenzhou. Don't talk about those useless things." Seeing that his purpose had been achieved, Zhang Feng did not care. He nodded and said, "Yes, you can reprimand me. I know that I have sinned deeply this time. No matter what punishment you give me, I am willing to accept it." He knew that his teachers were just angry that he went to Shenzhou. As long as he took the initiative to admit his mistake, he believed that his teachers would not be too angry. Chapter 1925. Sure enough, this method seemed to be effective. Yu Shinan waved his sleeves, not knowing what to say. He sat on the side and angrily drank his tea. The old scholar stared at Zhang Feng and said earnestly, "Fengzi, we are not angry at you for tinkering with these strange things. We are angry at you for putting yourself in danger. Even if you want to serve the country, can't you let someone else do it? Why do you have to go yourself? You should know that the son of a rich family should not sit under the eaves. Zhang Feng hurriedly bowed and said with a sincere face, "What the teachers say is reasonable. This student will keep it in mind and will not do it again in the future." Only then did everyone nod in satisfaction. Chu Suiliang stroked his beard. "Since you already know, then we will not say anything more. You are still injured, so rest well." After saying this, he turned and left. Everyone saw that Chu Suiliang had left and did not stay any longer, so they all left. But when they left, they all gave Zhang Feng a meaningful look that was hard to understand. Zhang Feng was the only one left in the room. He lowered his eyebrows and glanced around. Seeing that his teachers had all left, he slowly got up. But at this moment, the door was pushed open again. Zhang Feng was so scared that he hurriedly bowed and said respectfully, "Teachers, do you have any other orders?" A voice came from in front of him. "Prince Zhang, it's us." Zhang Feng could not help but be surprised. This voice did not belong to his teachers. He could not help but be curious. He raised his head and saw that it was Jingshu and Zhang Yuyao. He said unhappily, "So it's you two girls. What are you doing here?" Zhang Yuyao chuckled. "I didn't know young Master Zhang was so afraid of you gentlemen." Zhang Feng rolled his eyes at Zhang Yuyao and casually found a stool to sit down. "I'm not afraid. I'm just showing my respect. I owe my master a great debt of gratitude. This time I've angered them. It's only right for them to scold me." "Prince Zhang is right." Jingshu smiled and went forward to pour a cup of tea for Zhang Feng. "Sirs, you are doing this for the good of young master." Upon hearing this, Zhang Feng's face turned a little ugly. The words that his teachers had just reprimanded him were still ringing in his ears. Hence he waved his hand and said, "It's nothing. You guys go back to your residence first. I want to be alone." Oh, Jingshu nodded. She could tell that Prince Zhang was not in a good mood, so she pulled Zhang Yuyao back to their residence. As for Zhang Feng, he took out a cigarette from his waist and slowly lit it, savoring this lonely life. At the same time, in the imperial study, Li Shimin sat on the dragon throne with a cigarette in his hand. From time to time, he would take a puff. His complexion was not very good. He had been exchanging letters with Sheng Zhou for the past few days, but there was no news about Zhang Feng. For this reason, he sent out a few more teams, hoping to find news about Zhang Feng. In fact, he did not have much hope that Zhang Feng would be alive. Thinking about it, after blowing up the Turkic camp, even if he had a flying magical weapon, he could not stay in the sky forever. Since that was the case, he would definitely land. However, until now, why was there no news? Could it be that he was already dead? Or had he been captured by the Turkic people? Or had he been eaten by wild wolves? He had thought about all these. Now his only hope was to pick up the bones and bring them back. At least, he would have something to remember. However, at this moment, footsteps came from outside the door. Then little Gizi walked in with small, quick steps. Your Majesty, there is news." He hurried over and almost stumbled. He looked very anxious. Li Shimin raised his lazy eyelids, looking slightly tired. "What news?" Little Gizi hurried forward and said with joy, "There is news about Zhang Feng." "What?" Li Shimin stood up and looked at little Gizi in shock. He could not believe it. "Is what you just said true?" There had been no news about Fengzi for a few days. He thought that something had happened to this guy. Why was there suddenly news? Could it be that the Turkic people let him come back? Or had this guy met with a misfortune? Thinking of this, his eyes became even more excited. At this moment, little Gizi bowed and said seriously, "Your Majesty, didn't you ask me to inquire about Zhang Feng?" According to the guard outside the palace, Zhang Feng brought his family to Shao Mountain this morning. As for when he came back, I don't know. Li Shimin frowned. He felt that something was wrong. Shengzhou was at least a few hundred miles away from Chang'an. How could Fengzi come back so soon? This did not make sense. Moreover, even if this guy came back, why was there no news before? Why did he only get the news this morning? All of this was strange. He could not help but be suspicious. Is what you said true? Are you trying to deceive me? Hearing this, little Gizi felt bad. How could he dare to deceive His Majesty? His legs went soft and he crawled on the ground. Your Majesty, what I said is true. The news came from outside the palace. A guard saw Zhang Feng go to Xiao Mountain. Li Shimin knew that little Gizi did not dare to deceive him. However, this news was a bit strange. How did Fengzi come back? How did he escape the eyes and ears of Chang'an? After thinking for a while, he waved his sleeves. Fine, I'll assume that what you said is true. Go to Xiao Mountain and take a look. If I find out that the news is false, I'll come back and break your legs. Chapter 1926. Hearing this, little Gizi shuddered. In fact, he didn't know if Zhang Feng had really returned. The news came from outside the palace, and he was only a messenger. Now he could only pray that the news was true. Otherwise his leg. What are you waiting for? Li Shimin glanced at little Gizi and said impatiently, hurry up and help me change my clothes. Did Fengzi really come back? He had to confirm it. Otherwise he wouldn't be at ease. Relying on these messengers wasn't a solution. Moreover, if Fengzi really came back, he had to check if he was injured. This was very important. Soon the clothes were changed. Just as he was about to leave, Feng Xianling, Wei Zheng, and the others walked up. Feng Xianling looked at Li Shimin's plain clothes and asked curiously, Your Majesty, what are you doing? Li Shimin waved his hand impatiently. There's news that Fengzi is back. I want to go take a look. Fengzi was back. Everyone's eyes widened in surprise. They knew that Zhang Feng had been in Shenzhou. Why was he back so soon? There was no news about him. Why was he back so suddenly? Even though they didn't believe it, seeing that His Majesty was so impatient, it seemed to be true. Wei Zheng stepped forward and cupped his hands. Your Majesty, I'm willing to go too. Li Shimin was already impatient. Seeing that everyone wanted to go, he replied casually, Do as you wish. With that he waved his sleeves and left. Wei Zheng and the others looked at each other and followed closely. Actually, until now, they still couldn't believe that Fengzi was back. After all, Shenzhou wasn't close to Chang'an. How could he be back in just a few days? Although they thought about it, they still wanted to find out. In next to no time, their group arrived at Ballista Mountain's White Deer Academy. Li Shimin hurriedly jumped off the carriage and ran toward Zhang Feng's residence. As Wei Zheng and the others were old, their legs were not as nimble, so they could only run at the back. As they ran they shouted, Erlang, slow down. However, Li Shimin couldn't wait any longer. He rushed to the residence in a few strides and opened the door. A familiar figure was sitting on a chair, smoking. This person was naturally Zhang Feng. He was startled by the sudden voice and sat up abruptly. When he saw that it was Lao Li, he was so excited that he could not speak. Lao Li was one of his few good friends. Lao Li had helped him a lot in Chang'an City. When he was in Shenzhou, he missed Lao Li very much. Thus, he was naturally excited to see Lao Li again. On the other hand, when Li Shimin saw that it was Zhang Feng, he couldn't help but smile, as if all the grievances of the past few days had been revealed. Ever since Zhang Feng left, there wasn't a day that he didn't miss her. First, it was the Xuanwu Gate incident. Hundreds of officials forced him to abdicate. He even felt that the palace was a little suffocated. Everyone had betrayed him. At that time, he put all his hopes on Zhang Feng. Unfortunately, this guy didn't come back. However, it didn't matter. Later, there was also good news. The Turkic camp was bombed. Xieli and Tuli were injured. They all retreated to the grassland. Only then did the officials stop talking. Otherwise, he didn't know how these guys would slander him. This was all thanks to Fengzi. Thinking of this, he strode forward and gave Zhang Feng a bear hug. He said with emotion, Fengzi, you're finally back. It's good that you're back. Hee, I didn't know that you missed me so much. Zhang Feng patted Li Shimin's shoulder, and then stepped back. He looked at Li Shimin with joy. How have you been these days when I wasn't here? Li Shimin patted Zhang Feng's shoulder and smiled. I'm fine. How about you? When did you come back? Why didn't anyone find out? He naturally wouldn't take the initiative to tell Fengzi about what happened in the palace. After all, it wasn't something to be proud of. I came back yesterday. Zhang Feng smiled as if he thought of something happy. As for why I didn't find out, it's because I have a unique skill. As soon as he finished speaking, Feng Xianling and others rushed in. When they saw that it was really Zhang Feng, they were so excited that they couldn't speak. They were also very worried about Fengzi. After all, they had been friends for so long. At that time they all thought that this guy died in Shenzhou. They didn't expect that he was still alive and standing in front of them. How could they not be happy? In fact, the happiest one was Xiao Gizi. Just now, when he passed the news of Zhang Feng's return to His Majesty was still doubtful. Now that it was true, His Majesty could hug his leg, right? Zhang Feng, this brat, is usually not much, but now he has become our family's savior? Thinking about it, comparisons were odious. Zhang Feng didn't know this. Seeing that everyone was stunned, he couldn't help but ask, "What? Don't you recognize me?" This voice broke the silence in the room and interrupted everyone's thoughts. Wei Zheng stepped forward and looked at Zhang Feng. Not simple, not simple. From Chang'an to Shenzhou, and then from Shenzhou back to Chang'an. Boy, how did you do it? Chapter 1927. To be honest, he was very curious about this. Although he knew that Fengzi had made something that could fly up into the sky, no one had seen it before and no one knew about it. He was not the only one who was curious. Everyone present was curious as well. Li Shimin was also curious and asked, "Fengzi, what's going on? Tell us." Don't rush." Zhang Feng chuckled and waved for everyone to sit down. "Sit down first. I'll get the canteen to prepare some dishes. We'll talk while eating." Upon hearing this, Li Shimin swallowed his saliva and felt his taste buds begin to bloom. He had not been able to eat or sleep well in the past few days in the palace. Now that Fengzi was back, he felt a little better. It would be great if he could freeload off the academy's delicacies. Thus he said, "Okay, let's talk while eating." Zhang Feng was naturally happy. He turned and waved at the door to ask someone to prepare the dishes. Not long after, a few students came up with braised meat, roasted chicken, and other things. They placed everything neatly on the table, turned around and left. Zhang Feng waved to everyone and smiled. Come, sit down. Don't be shy." Li Shimin smiled faintly and sat down near Zhang Feng. Old Feng, why aren't you sitting?" Zhang Feng saw that Wei Zheng and the others had not sat down and asked subconsciously. Wei Zheng and the others looked expectantly at the food and wine, and then at Li Shimin. They had no choice. Without His Majesty's order, they did not dare to sit. Li Shimin naturally knew what everyone was thinking. He waved his hand and said, "Sit down. We're happy today. Don't worry about this." Then he glanced at little Gizi. "You sit too." Little Gizi looked at Li Shimin in surprise. He had wanted to sit down and taste the delicacies for a long time. His Majesty had not eaten well these past few days, so how could a servant dare to eat well? Thus, he naturally starved with His Majesty. Now that His Majesty had allowed him to sit down, this was a great gift. Without hesitation, he chose a seat close to Li Shimin so that it would be easier for him to serve food to His Majesty. When Li Shimin saw that everyone was seated, he looked at Zhang Feng and asked, "Fengzi, you haven't answered my question yet." "Don't worry." Zhang Feng picked up the wine jar and poured everyone a cup of wine. Then he picked up the wine bowl and said, "Come, let's drink first." Although everyone was curious, the wine stimulated their taste buds. Unable to resist the temptation, they clinked their cups and downed the wine. Seeing this, Zhang Feng put down the wine glass in satisfaction and looked at everyone with a proud face. "I can run from Chang'an to Shenzhou and back. It's all thanks to my hot air balloon." After saying that, he picked up a piece of braised meat and threw it into his mouth, gorging himself. Everyone was dumbfounded. What is a hot air balloon? He had never heard of it before. Is it the thing that floated in the sky of Chang'an last time? Wei Zheng coughed softly and asked shamelessly, "Fengzi, is the hot air balloon you mentioned the one that flew in the sky of Chang'an a few days ago?" "Yes." Zhang Feng chewed 2 mouthfuls, glanced at everyone and said proudly, "This thing is newly developed by me. It can go to the sky, no matter where it goes. Not to mention Shenzhou. It can even go to the Turks and back. No one was surprised by this answer. After all, they had seen the thing in the sky with their own eyes. But there was one thing. Could this hot air balloon float to the Turks? Wasn't this a bit exaggerated? After all, Shenzhou and the Turks were not in the same place. They should be dozens of miles away from each other. Shenzhou was just a border of the Tang dynasty. How could it be as easy as Fengzi said? If so, why did the Tang dynasty need to resist the Turks? Couldn't they just send a few hot air balloons there? Therefore Wei Zheng, who had always been strict and old-fashioned, questioned. Fengzi, you said that it is possible to go to Shenzhou. After all, many people have seen it. But isn't it a bit exaggerated to go to the Turks? You know, Shenzhou is still some distance away from the Turks. Everyone also felt that Wei Zheng's words were reasonable. They nodded and looked at Zhang Feng with confusion. As for Zhang Feng, when he found that his boasting was questioned, he blushed and said, "What do you know? The hot air balloon I made was supposed to go to the Turks this time. But I met Xieli in Shenzhou and taught him a lesson. Otherwise I would have gone to the Turks and blown up these bastards." "Oh," Li Shimin nodded and pretended to be suddenly enlightened. "Then what did you do to Xieli in the end?" In fact, he could see that Fengzi was boasting. But he was too lazy to expose him. Therefore he could only change the topic. Zhang Feng did not pay too much attention to it. The moment he heard Xieli's name, he seemed to have regained all his strength. With an excited look on his face, he said, "Let me tell you, when Qingchumo and I arrived at the Turkic camp, those fellows actually did not dodge or hide when they saw us. They even kept cheering on the ground as if they were celebrating something. This really made me mad. Why didn't those Turks run when they saw you? Didn't they know that you were going to blow them up?" Chapter 1928. Li Shimin looked at Zhang Feng curiously. "How would I know?" Zhang Feng was also puzzled. Then he changed the topic and said with a smile, "Speaking of this, I want to laugh. Of course, it's best for us that the Turks didn't run away. When we threw down all the gunpowder, those guys were instantly blown apart. Minced meat was everywhere on the ground, and blood stained the whole ground." After that, he picked up the wine bowl in front of him and took a sip. Then he laughed and said, "Every time I think of this, I feel happy. These bastards have robbed the Tang dynasty every year. It's time for them to pay their debts." "That's right." Li Shimin nodded and looked at Zhang Feng with satisfaction. "Fengzi, you've really made the Tang dynasty proud. Let's see if those bastards still dare to look down on the people of the Tang dynasty in the future." He was very satisfied. In this battle of Shang province, his side had only sent 4 people, while the Turks had thousands of soldiers. With such a large difference in numbers, they had been beaten to a pulp. It was really inconceivable. He knew the Turks very well. In the past, he had dealt with these guys a lot. These guys could be described as inhumane. They burned, killed, robbed, and did all kinds of evil. This time, they had suffered a blow, but it didn't hurt their foundation at all. What if they made a comeback in the future? Moreover, the Turks had a strong recovery ability, and their cavalry was even more fierce. What if they came to rob the border of the Tang dynasty again? Thinking of this, he quickly asked, "Fengzi, this time you blew up the Turks, but what about next time? You know, these guys won't give up easily." Zhang Feng frowned. In fact, he also understood this. Although the Turks had suffered losses this time, it didn't affect their foundation. After a few years of recuperation, they should be able to make a comeback. At that time, the people on the border of the Tang dynasty would suffer again. This, while he was lost in thought, Zhang Sun Wuji's voice sounded. "Fengzi, didn't you use that hot air balloon to attack the Turks this time? Can we use the same method next time?" As soon as he finished speaking, Zhang Feng slammed the table and stood up. "That's right, why didn't I think of that? The hot air balloons could fly in the air. Even if the Turks were somewhat inferior, they could only flee for their lives. There was no way for them to guard against the hot air balloons. If he could make more hot air balloons, he would be able to catch them off guard during the battle." Thinking up to this point, he glanced at the crowd excitedly. The hot air balloon is flying in the air. Even if the Turks see it, they won't be able to guard against it. Furthermore, at night, the Turks' vision will be impaired. We can definitely catch them off guard. Li Shimin nodded. Fengzi, what you said makes sense. However, when can you finish making this hot air balloon? Zhang Feng was stunned. The first generation of hot air balloons had already been sacrificed. If they wanted to recreate it now, they would have to innovate. In particular, they had to modify equipment that could prevent air leakage, and also install equipment that could turn. Otherwise, the danger of the hot air balloon would be greatly increased, and the losses would outweigh the gains. After thinking for a while, he said, I still need to study the hot air balloon again. As for when it will be ready, I don't know. What about the hot air balloon you used to go to Shenzhou? Wei Jing asked curiously. The one before? Zhang Feng spread his hands awkwardly. That one has been destroyed. Wei Jing's eyes widened. How could it be destroyed? He remembered that this thing flew from Chang'an and to Shenzhou and then back to Chang'an, and from Shenzhou. How could such a powerful thing be destroyed? This was a reckless waste of God's gift. The others also looked at Zhang Feng as if they were looking at a sinner. It was as if they were saying that he had done something very wrong. Zhang Feng couldn't stand it anymore. He waved his hand and said impatiently, I didn't want it to be destroyed. There was an accident on the way back to Chang'an, and it was destroyed. What's the use of looking at me like this? Of course, he couldn't tell them about the time when he was treated as a beggar. He still wanted to save face. However, the others didn't want to hear this. They only cared about the things that were beneficial to the country and the people. But on second thought, Fengzi's contribution in blowing up the Turks was indispensable. So they fell silent. Zhang Feng saw that the atmosphere was a little awkward. He laughed and said, By the way, I blew up the Turks this time. I still don't know how that old guy Xieli is doing. Do you have any news? Upon hearing this, Li Shimin's interest was piqued. Xieli could be regarded as his mortal enemy. When he was in the Sui dynasty, this guy burned, killed, and looted at the border. He once led the army to fight, but in the end, nothing was done. After ascending the throne, Xieli went from bad to worse, constantly harassing the people at the border. He had always wanted to get rid of this guy, but he didn't have the chance. It was Fengzi who helped him vent his anger. Thinking of this, he picked up the wine bowl and drank it. Then he looked at Zhang Feng. This time, I have to thank you. After the battle in Shenzhou, according to the news from the Turks, Xieli lost an arm and Tuli was seriously injured. So powerful? Zhang Feng opened his eyes wide. He couldn't believe it. Chapter 1929. When he threw the explosives, he threw them at places with many people. He didn't care about Xieli at all. He didn't expect Xieli to be blown up like this, and even lose an arm. In that case, Xieli wouldn't be able to ride a horse. Maybe he would even lose his position as Khan. But Tuli was lucky. He was only seriously injured. What a pity. Thinking, he said, How's the Turks' headquarters? Li Shimin poured a full cup of wine for Zhang Feng. He continued, Ever since Xieli and Tuli were injured, the Tuju's headquarters had different degrees of internal strife. Not a few aristocrats wanted to replace Xieli. This is a good thing. Zhang Feng slapped the table. He was a little excited because he knew this was a good opportunity. The Tang dynasty should send people to rope them in. Maybe we can pull the Turks into the Tang dynasty. You know, the Turks exist in tribal form. Every tribe has its king. Li Shimin rolled his eyes at Zhang Feng, thinking that this guy's thinking was a little simple. The imperial court naturally knows this. But this internal strife was quelled by Xieli's subordinates not long after. The Tang dynasty's emissaries didn't go in at all. So that's how it is. Zhang Feng suddenly understood. Although the Turks had suffered losses this time, they were not pushovers. It would not be easy to eradicate them. Thus he continued. Although there is no chance this time, since they had internal strife, I believe that it will happen again soon. The next time will be a good opportunity. Everyone nodded, thinking that Zhang Feng's words were reasonable. The Turks were originally war-hungry and murderous. They had a wild nature in their bones. Every tribe was separated. They had their own kings and beliefs. Even the largest tribe, Xieli, was the same. He had used force to conquer the other tribes, and that was how he became the Khan. Now that this guy had lost an arm, the other tribes would definitely not accept it. At that time, there would be another great battle, and the grassland would change owners. Zhang Feng was naturally well aware of this. He glanced at everyone and said, "When I make the hot air balloon, everything I just said will be fine." Li Shimin nodded. He believed in Feng Zi's ability, so he didn't say much. He directly picked up the wine bowl and said with a smile, "After the hot air balloon is done, you have to let me try it. I want to see what's going on with that thing that can go up to the sky." "No problem, it's just a small matter." Zhang Feng took a sip and smiled. Then, he seemed to have thought of something and changed the topic. "What happened in Chang'an city recently? Why do I hear rumors about me everywhere?" Li Shimin put down his wine bowl and let out a long sigh. "Isn't this all your fault?" "Me?" Zhang Feng looked puzzled and puzzled. "I've always been in Victory Prefecture. What trouble could I have caused?" Li Shimin snorted and was a little unhappy. Then he looked at Zhang Sunwuji and said, "You tell him." Zhang Sunwuji could naturally understand Li Shimin's feelings. He was still angry about being forced to abdicate a few days ago, so he coughed softly and said, "Feng Zi, when you flew over Chang'an city that day, the people in Chang'an city thought that you were a jinx, causing the whole city to be in a panic. That's not all. You made the emperor suffer." Speaking of this, he glanced at Li Shimin intentionally or unintentionally. Seeing that the latter didn't respond, he continued, "The ministers also thought that you were a jinx, and even the ghosts of the Xuanwu Gate. So all the officials asked the emperor to issue an edict." "What?" Zhang Feng exclaimed and widened his eyes. "This has nothing to do with me. At that time, I just wanted to go to Victory Prefecture to blow up those Turkic bastards." Now the best way was to clear himself of suspicion, so that Li Er wouldn't suspect him. Otherwise, if he was punished like this, he would probably be sentenced to death. However, the others didn't think so, because they were the culprits who forced the emperor to abdicate. The real master hadn't said anything yet. Not only that, they even looked down on Zhang Feng. Just now he said that he would go to Victory Prefecture halfway, but now he changed his words and went to Victory Prefecture of his own accord. How shameless. However, they didn't care. After all, the real master didn't blame him. What could they say? Therefore, Zhang Sunwuji continued, "I don't mean to blame you. His Majesty did issue an edict, but the storm passed quickly." "That's good." Zhang Feng patted his chest and relaxed his nervous mood. "What happened after that?" Zhang Sunwuji paused and then said, "Later, he also prepared a sacrificial ceremony and a Waterland conference." Waterland conference? Zhang Feng was stunned and vaguely remembered something. Didn't Xuanzang get to know Li Er at the Waterland conference and become brothers? Now that Li Er was going to hold a Waterland conference, would Xuanzang participate? This guy was going to India. If he got to know Xuanzang, maybe he could get some information about India? Or maybe he could arrange a few spies around Xuanzang. When the time came, they could go to India to gather information. Thinking of this, he quickly asked, "When will the Waterland conference be held? I also want to see the world." Chapter 1930. Seems like you still have some conscience. Li Shimin snorted, then looked at Zhang Sunwuji. When will the Waterland conference be held? He wasn't worried that Feng Zi would see him, because there would be a lot of people. Moreover, the place where the emperor stayed was off limits. There were tens of thousands of guards, so it was impossible to get close. Zhang Sunwuji thought for a while, then lowered his eyebrows. "I'm not sure yet, because there are a lot of rules that haven't been drawn up yet. It will probably be after the ceremony." Zhang Feng nodded. He wasn't in a hurry, since Xuanzang would surface sooner or later. Then they began to eat heartily. Before they could eat to their heart's content, footsteps came from outside the door. After a while, Yu Shinan and the others walked in with a gloomy face. He glanced at the dishes on the table, then looked at Li Shimin and the others. His face fell. "What are you doing?" He was teaching students just now, but when he heard that Li Shimin and the others were here, he knew that this guy wasn't easy to deal with. He would definitely urge Feng Zi to do this and that, so he rushed over. But when he came, He saw that they were drinking. Li Shimin was a little confused. He wanted to catch up with Feng Zi, but he didn't expect old Yu to rush in. He could only smile and say, Mr. Bosher is too polite. We heard that Feng Zi is back, so we specially came to catch up with Feng Zi. Catch up? Yu Shernan glanced at the dishes on the table and snorted. Why are you drinking? Li Shimin looked a little embarrassed. He didn't know how to answer Yu Shernan's question. Zhang Feng saw this and quickly smiled. Teacher, Lao Li just saw that I haven't seen him in a long time, so he came to see me. Drinking some wine is fine. Fine. Yu Shernan looked at Zhang Feng and said with disappointment. Didn't you say you were injured? Are you sure it's fine? Feng Zi, are you injured? Li Shimin was a little surprised. He didn't know about this. If he had known, he wouldn't have dragged Feng Zi to drink, let alone now that he was caught by Yu Shernan. Zhang Feng waved his hand, not minding it at all. It's just a small injury, no big deal. Hearing this, Yu Shernan was a little unhappy. He snorted coldly and said, Even if it doesn't matter, you can't drink. Take away all the wine now. After he finished speaking, he waved his hand towards the door. Soon, a few students came in and took away the wine jars on the table. Li Shimin, Zhang Feng, and the others could only watch helplessly. Their hearts ached, but there was nothing they could do. It was impossible to snatch the wine back, right? Until all the wine was moved away, they didn't say a word. Li Shimin saw that there was no more wine to drink, and Yu Shernan was also here. He had to say goodbye to Zhang Feng. Feng Zi, we'll visit you again next time. Zhang Feng naturally saw the awkwardness in the scene, so he could only wave goodbye. The group of people cupped their hands and bid farewell to Yu Shernan and the others. Yu Shernan was like an old monk in meditation, not saying a word. He had brought disgrace upon himself, so he could only leave secretly. Seeing that everyone had left, Yu Shernan's expression eased a little. He looked at Zhang Feng and said earnestly, Feng Zi, don't interact with these guys in the future. They're not good people. In his heart, he had already blacklisted Li Shimin. As for Zhang Sun Wuji and the others, they were treacherous ministers. Zhang Feng didn't know this. He had always regarded Lao Li and the others as good friends. How could he let others speak ill of them? However, it was different for his teachers. He still had to agree on the surface, so he said, Yes, teacher. This student will remember. Yu Shernan didn't say anything else, because he knew that it was better to do it himself. He flicked his sleeves and left. Only Zhang Feng was left in the room. He sat on a chair, lit a cigarette, and let the smoke stimulate his brain. He thought about how to break free from the restraints of his teachers, and how to not make them angry. Time slowly passed as he thought about it. It was night. A cold wind blew, and the white birch trees in the courtyard rustled. The white snow that hung on the treetops from the day before fell, making a crackling sound. After a while, silver-white snowflakes fell from the sky, and the ground was once again covered in silver. The next day, the golden crow slowly peeked through the clouds, revealing half of its red cheeks, like a shy little Kyanang. The golden sun sprinkled on the ground, and the snow seemed to be covered with gold bricks. It was so bright that people couldn't open their eyes. From time to time, the mountain stream stopped these sparrows. They flew back to their nests with scattered fruits in their mouths. They even cried out happily, as if they were composing a victory movement. The loud sound of reading came from the academy. The morning reading had begun. This was the most precious time of the day. Zhang Feng was also woken up by the students on time. He washed up, ate breakfast, and went to the classroom to check on the students' homework. He didn't need to do this. With the teachers around, they could all do it. However, when he returned, the teacher said that he couldn't be lazy and asked him to continue his inspection. This couldn't be helped. He couldn't disobey his teachers. Chapter 1931. So he came to the classroom. As usual, the students buried their heads in their books and began to read aloud without the need for others to urge them. Zhang Feng nodded pretentiously. These students made him feel at ease. He didn't need to worry about anything. His teacher was worrying for nothing. After seeing the students, he walked towards the research institute. Because of the hot air balloon incident last time, he was still brooding. falling from the sky. It was too humiliating. Moreover, he was regarded as a child beggar in Chang'an City. Even his family couldn't recognize him when he returned home. This was simply shameful. In addition, he promised Lao Li and the others yesterday that he would let them try the hot air balloon after making it. Thinking, he arrived at the research institute in a short while. As soon as he stepped through the door, he heard cheers. "The dean is back! The dean is back!" Zhang Feng turned around abruptly, thinking that the brat had such good eyesight to recognize Lao Tzu at a glance. Following the sound, he saw a guy as thin as a monkey waving at him. Who else could it be but Pihu? He walked towards Pihu with quick steps, and said with a smile, "Little guy, your eyes are quite bright, huh?" Pihu scratched his head and smiled. "I don't have any other good points, but my eyes are good." There was a hint of pride in his words. After saying that, he seemed to have remembered something and shouted again, "The dean is back!" The sound was ear-piercing and attracted a large number of students in a short while. Among them were many familiar faces, including Peng Shui, Jin Kai, and the others. They surrounded Zhang Feng, cheering excitedly like a flock of sparrows. "Dean, I heard you went to Shang State this time? How was it there?" "Yeah, I heard the dean almost killed Xieli, but in the end that bastard ran away." "Is it true?" Everyone was talking at once, discussing animatedly. To be honest, Zhang Feng liked the feeling of being the moon surrounded by stars. However, couldn't these guys talk one by one? Were they going to make a fuss now? Each one of them was more anxious than him? It was too much. He was a little annoyed and couldn't answer. He could only wave his sleeves and raise his right hand. "Keep." The students were very tactful. Seeing that the dean was a little unhappy, they stopped talking. They just surrounded him and waited for him to speak. But at this moment, a familiar voice came from not far away. "Who is it? Who was talking about the dean? Am I going to break his legs today?" Immediately Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun walked over angrily. They were just studying how to modify the hot air balloon in the laboratory, so that they could give their teacher a satisfactory answer. Then he heard a series of shouts outside the door, saying that the dean had returned. Wasn't this **T? The dean was far away in Shenzhou. How could he have returned so quickly? Therefore the two of them rushed out in anger. But when he took a closer look, he was shocked. He was truly a benefactor, a living benefactor. Tears welled up in their eyes as they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Ma Zhou took a step forward and touched Zhang Feng's broad shoulders. His voice trembled as he asked, "Are you really my teacher?" "If I'm not your teacher, then are you my teacher?" Zhang Feng scolded with a smile. He could understand how these two fellows felt. Just like old Du, they were excited. The facts proved that it was true. Hao Chujun looked at Zhang Feng excitedly and said with a smile, "Benefactor, when did you come back? Why didn't you inform us?" "I just came back yesterday." Zhang Feng laughed and tried to cover up the embarrassment. Then he said, "Let's not talk about this. I have something important to tell you. Let's go to the laboratory." After that, he walked quickly to the laboratory. Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun followed closely behind. But when they turned around and saw that these students didn't seem to want to leave, they said, "You can all go back. Benefactor has something to say." They didn't mean to dismiss these students. Since their teacher said that he had something important to say, it was definitely not suitable for others to hear. The students were sensible enough to leave in twos and threes. But they glanced at the laboratory unwillingly. Inside the room, Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun came to Zhang Feng. They were still excited. "Benefactor, what is going on? We were worried to death." This was true. A few days ago, when the academy sent the news that the dean had disappeared, they sent the students out to inquire about the news. But they found nothing, which made them very disappointed. Now the dean suddenly appeared in front of them. They found it hard to accept for a while. This was inevitable. Zhang Feng didn't care about this. He just roughly told them what had happened. Of course, he omitted the part where he fell from the hot air balloon and was treated as a child beggar. If the students knew that he had such a side, how embarrassing it would be. After the two heard this, they looked at Zhang Feng with respect. This time, they looked at him as if they were looking at a hero. Ma Zhou couldn't hold back the excitement in his heart. He couldn't help but ask, Benefactor, so what the outside world said is true. You really attacked the Turkic camp and injured Xieli. You are really amazing. Chapter 1932. That's right. Our teacher not only dampened the Turk spirit, but also boosted the prestige of the Tang dynasty. He is indeed worthy of being our teacher. Hao Chujun nodded and gave Zhang Feng a thumbs up. Then he seemed to think of something and his eyes flashed with pride. But this time we also contributed. Wasn't this hot air balloon made by me and Ma Zhou in cooperation with our teacher? In fact, Zhang Feng was quite pleased with their words at the beginning. After all, they were praising him. There was nothing wrong with it. However, when he heard the latter part, he felt something was wrong. This guy seemed to be asking for credit. What hot air balloon was made by you and Lao Tzu? I was the one who did it. You guys were just helping me out from the side. But now it's all thanks to you? Not only that, when the hot air balloon was mentioned, he remembered the embarrassing incident of being treated as a child beggar in Chang'an. Now these two guys actually had the face to ask for credit. He frowned and pulled a long face. You two brats, now you have the face to talk about the hot air balloon in front of me? Don't you know that the hot air balloon? At this point he realized something was wrong and quickly changed the topic. Humph, the hot air balloon is not good to begin with. You still have the face to talk about it? Hearing this, Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun were a little confused. Their teacher clearly took the hot air balloon to Shengzhou. Why did he turn around and say that the hot air balloon was not good? This was a classic example of not admitting it after putting on his pants. However, they did not dare to say this, especially Ma Zhou. He was timid and had already retreated to the side. Hao Chujun chuckled and scratched his head. Teacher, how can you blame us for this? Zhang Feng was unhappy when he heard this. How can I not blame you? You don't know how to study it properly and only idle around. Teacher? Enough. Zhang Feng stopped in time and glanced at the two. Let's not talk about this. Prepare the materials. We will start to improve the hot air balloon. Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun were a little confused, but they still nodded and went to prepare the materials. At the same time in Zhang Mansion, when Cheng Chimo and the others woke up, they discovered a problem. Zhang Feng had disappeared. Mother****. This brat couldn't have slipped away, right? Don't want to take responsibility? His injuries were all caused by this fellow. If he didn't see him now, who would he look for in the future? Moreover, they had worked together to blow up the Turkic camp. No matter how you looked at it, they would be rewarded when the time came. They had already decided to go to the battlefield, and back then, Feng Zi had promised them heavy armor. He wanted to give the insect light cavalry, and turn Wei Zi into an assassin. Now that this brat had slipped away, who was he going to find to fulfill his promise? Thinking of this, they couldn't help but vent their anger. She rushed out of the guest room, and wanted to settle accounts with Zhang Feng. At this moment, they bumped into Du Ziting. Cheng Chimo knew that this was the Zhang family's lackey, so he grabbed Du Ziting's neck with one hand and said fiercely, Du, where did Feng Zi go? Du Ziting was a little confused. Wasn't everything fine yesterday? Why was this group of people so ferocious today? Did old master owe them money? Or did he offend them? If that was the case, then he couldn't reveal old master's whereabouts. Thinking of this, he patted Cheng Chimo's shoulder and said earnestly, Did old master owe you money? I'll give it to you. Don't be so impatient. Let the old man down first. After saying this, he moved his legs and was about to break free from Cheng Chimo's grip. Cheng Chimo increased his strength and didn't allow him to break free. He shouted, Old man, don't be so sarcastic with Lao Tzu. Feng Zi doesn't owe us money, but this fellow is even more despicable than that. Hurry up and tell me, where is he? Yes, hurry up and tell me. Du Go and Zhang Sun Chong were like foxes borrowing the tiger's might to intimidate others. They were very arrogant. Du Ziting originally thought that it was just a small amount of money, but it seemed like it wasn't. Looking at these people's fierce expressions, old master must have offended them. He had never seen such a scene before. Usually, everyone was respectful when they saw him. Now that he met these people, if he had known, he wouldn't have let old master bring them back. What the hell? Although he was cursing in his heart, he was already scared stiff. His face was pale as he said with a trembling voice, "Masters, how would I know where old master went? If I offended you in the past, please forgive me. Just treat it as a fart, okay?" These people still hadn't said what they wanted from old master. What if they wanted to harm old master? He couldn't say it even if he was beaten to death. "You won't say it?" Chang'an frowned and was somewhat dissatisfied. He increased the strength of his hand. "If you don't say it, Lao Tzu will beat the shit out of you. Let's see if you can still be so stubborn then." After saying this, he raised his huge right palm and swung it. Du Ziding only felt his vision go black. A palm leaf fan-like palm swung over. Chapter 1933. Slap. The slap was crisp and clear. Du Ziding saw stars in front of his eyes. Before he could react, his thin and weak body fell to the ground. He felt that his old waist was about to break. Then he screamed like a pig being slaughtered. This scream quickly attracted a group of servants. They knew that it was the housekeeper's voice and rushed over with weapons in their hands. However, would Chang'an let Du Ziding off so easily? He hadn't achieved his goal yet. He strode in front of Du Ziding and grabbed him again. He shouted, "Hurry up and speak." Du Ziding felt a sweetness in his throat. It was as if something was moving in his mouth. He stuck his tongue out and saw a tooth fall out. He was shocked. "My tooth." Chang'an didn't have the time to care about this. He continued to shout, "I'm asking you a question. Where did Fengzi go?" Du Ziding was really scared this time. He originally thought that he could solve this problem with money. How did it end up like this? If he had known, he would have said it earlier. Master was so smart. He shouldn't be in trouble. He thought for a moment and his body trembled. Master went to Shao Mountain. Shao Mountain. Chang'an frowned. He turned around and glanced at Zhang Sun and Du Ziding. He then looked at Du Ziding and said coldly, "You're not lying to us, right?" I wouldn't dare. Du Ziding shook his head. Blood flowed down the corner of his mouth. Chang'an turned around and gave Zhang Sun and Du Ziding a look. Then he let go of Du Ziding and ran out. The poor Du Ziding staggered. If it wasn't for the servants supporting him, he would have fallen to the ground. On the other hand, Chang'an and the others bought a few horses and rushed to Shao Mountain. They first went to White Deer College. However, they didn't find any trace of Zhang Feng. This made them furious. They thought that the old fox Du Ziding had lied to them. It wasn't until they heard a group of people talking about the dean going to the research institute that they understood. Wasn't the dean Fengzi? He went to the research institute. Thinking of this, everyone rushed back to the research institute. When he arrived at the research institute, he saw Zhang Feng leading Ma Zhou and the others in an experiment. They hurriedly went up and shouted, "Fengzi, Fengzi." Fengzi frowned. Why did this voice sound so familiar? He turned around and saw that it was Chang'an and the others. He instantly lost all interest because he knew that these fellows were definitely up to no good. He said with a helpless expression, "Why are you guys here? Didn't the doctor tell you to rest well?" Upon hearing this, Chang'an jumped 8 feet into the air and glared at him. "You still have the cheek to say that? Why did you run away and leave us in the Zhang mansion? Tell me, do you not want to take responsibility for us?" "Stop." Zhang Feng quickly waved his hand and rolled his eyes. "What do you mean by taking responsibility? You make it sound like Lao Tzu did something to you." After saying that, he crossed his arms and said with some dissatisfaction, "Tell me honestly, why are you looking for me?" Isn't this attitude good enough?" Zhang Sun smiled and took a step forward. It was unknown if he didn't see Zhang Feng's dissatisfaction or if he did it on purpose, but he acted as if he didn't care at all. He said shamelessly, "Fengzi, look, we went to Shenzhou together this time and even blew up the Turkic camp. Didn't we make a great contribution?" Something was wrong. This was Zhang Feng's first reaction. When these fellows went there, each of them was more afraid than the other, and almost peed their pants. Now that they were finally back, they were actually concerned about the Turkic matter. What great contribution was this? Could it be that these fellows still wanted to enter the government? That shouldn't be possible. These fellows were usually lazy and gluttonous. It was impossible for them to change today. What was going on? Thinking of this, he looked at everyone with a strange expression. We did make a great contribution. So what? That's right. Dugo clapped his hands and said excitedly, Fengzi, do you still remember the promise you made to us in the past? Promise? Zhang Feng frowned and didn't understand. What promise did he make to these fellows in the past? He couldn't help but ask, what promise? Did you guys eat the wrong medicine? Are you trying to go back on your words? Cheng Chimo grabbed Zhang Feng and stared at him. Did you forget that you want to turn me into a heavy cavalry? Heavy cavalry? Zhang Feng's eyes turned. His memory was a little fuzzy. He seemed to have said it before. It seemed that he didn't just promise Cheng Chimo, he also promised Buggy to turn him into a light cavalry. That's right, there was also Wei Zi. He wanted to turn this fellow into an assassin. Thinking of this, he smiled and pushed away Cheng Chimo's hand. I thought it was something else. Isn't it just this? Then when are you going to fulfill your promise? Give me the heavy cavalry. Cheng Chimo was excited. He pulled Zhang Feng's hand and said with a smile, now that I have made a great contribution, it is the best time to go to the military camp. Zhang Feng didn't reply. Instead, he put his hands behind his back and looked at the sky. He seemed to be deep in thought and occasionally stole glances behind him. It wasn't that he didn't want to give it, but that he couldn't. Now that the forging workshop was making guns, where would he have the time to make these things? Seeing that Cheng Chimo had nothing to say, he laughed and said, Fengzi, then why are you making this hot air balloon again? Don't tell me you want to blow up the Turkic camp again? Blow up your sister. Zhang Feng rolled his eyes at Zhang Sun and said snappily, have you all forgotten what happened last time? This time, I want to modify the hot air balloon again to avoid the danger last time. Understand? Zhang Sun nodded, not quite understanding. Then he thought of something and asked, if you're making hot air balloons here, what about our heavy armor and light cavalry? Hearing this, Cheng Chimo was also interested. Yes, if Fengzi kept making hot air balloons here, then his heavy armor would be ruined soon. Thus he quickly asked, Fengzi, you can't do this. You can make hot air balloons in the future, and I can help you personally. Now you have to help me make the heavy armor. Dugo also nodded. Although he didn't get a share of these things as brothers, he naturally hoped that Tai Niu and the others would get something. In the future, when he wanted to play, he could just borrow it. Zhang Feng shook his head disapprovingly. You don't understand. There are many problems with hot air balloons now, and they must be improved immediately. Otherwise, they won't be able to be used in the future. Moreover, I promised Lao Li to make one for him to see. When everyone heard Lao Li, they instantly understood what was going on. Fengzi didn't know who Lao Li was, but they knew. Since His Majesty wanted to see it, it meant that His Majesty also attached great importance to it. Then this couldn't be delayed. However, what about their heavy armor and light cavalry? Were they going to just let it go? The three of them looked at each other, their eyes filled with unwillingness. In the end, it was Cheng Chimo who spoke. Fengzi, since you want to do this, then we have nothing to say. What about the heavy armor and light cavalry you promised us? You can't just let it go, right? Zhang Feng had a headache. Why were these guys so obsessed with heavy armor? He let out a long sigh. How about this? Let's talk about it after I finish modifying the hot air balloons. Right now, the forge is making guns. Don't worry, I'll give it to you sooner or later. When the three of them heard this, they felt that this was Fengzi's final compromise. There was no other way. After all, His Majesty also wanted to see it, so they could only nod and agree. Zhang Feng finally let out a sigh of relief. Since there's no problem, you guys should hurry up and leave. I feel annoyed just looking at you. No, we can't leave. Cheng Chimo's head twitched, his face filled with reluctance. Chapter 1935. This confused Zhang Feng. He asked subconsciously, why? Why don't you guys leave? Cheng Chimo rolled his eyes. What if you run away again after we leave? Chang'an is so big, it's not easy for us to find you. Zhang Feng finally understood what was going on. These guys just wanted to follow him. They looked like misers, afraid that he would not give them heavy armor. But this was also good. If there was any heavy work later, he could let these guys do it. After thinking about it, he pretended to be reluctant. You guys can't stay. This is confidential and can't be seen by outsiders. No, we have to stay. Yes, this is the biggest concession we can make. The three of them argued until their faces were red. They were unwilling to back down. Zhang Feng saw that they were so determined and wanted to laugh. Since they wanted to stay, they could do hard work for Lao Tzu. He coughed lightly and said with a serious face, "Since you guys want to stay, you can help us later. Don't be lazy." "No problem." Cheng Chimo waved his hand, indicating that there was no problem. Then he ran to Ma Zhou. "Xiaoma, what do you need me to help with?" Seeing that Cheng Chimo had gone to help, Zhang Sunchong and Zhang Sunchong did not want to stay any longer, so they quickly went to help. Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun were a little confused. They were doing a good job. Why would they need help? They looked to their mentor for help. Zhang Feng waved his hand and smiled. "Tainyo, you guys go up?" Actually, they were already prepared just now. It was almost the same as before. They just tied up the seal a little tighter. This experiment was to see what the problem was with their own eyes. Originally, he was prepared to go up. Since these three guys were here, he naturally had to go up and sacrifice himself for science. However, Cheng Chimo obviously did not think so. He thought that he was just going to help. He did not expect to go up. This time, he was furious. He stepped back. "Fengzi, are you trying to kill me? Don't you know how dangerous this thing is? Didn't you say you wanted to help?" Zhang Feng revealed a malicious smile, then glanced at Zhang Sun, Chong and the others. "Besides, you're not the only one going up. There are these two guys as well. And us." Zhang Sun and Du Go stared at each other. They still remembered the scene outside Chang'an City. That was an incomparably miserable time, falling from the sky. They did not want to experience that feeling a second time. Therefore, he hurriedly waved his hand. "Fengzi, we're not going. You know that our backs haven't recovered yet. You're sending us to our deaths. Don't worry." Zhang Feng smiled. "I've improved the hot air balloon this time. There won't be any problems. If there really is a problem, I'll be waiting for you down there." Zhang Sun frowned in disbelief. Moreover, Fengzi's smile did not seem to have any good intentions. Chapter 1936. Cheng Chimo glanced back, and the two instantly understood. Zhang Sun looked at Zhang Feng. "Okay, let's go." Zhang Feng smiled. In fact, he had already guessed this result, so he said, "Okay, you guys go up now. I promise you won't be in danger." In fact, he had his reasons for saying this. The previous incident could only be considered an accident, but this time was different. The seal had been reinforced, and it would only be tested for a while. That was why he dared to let the three of them go up. Otherwise, he wouldn't dare even if he had 10 guts. However, Cheng Chimo and the other two didn't think so. They were still immersed in the pain of the previous injury, but they had no choice but to agree to Fengzi's request. They could only reluctantly board the hot air balloon. Zhang Feng was overjoyed. He quickly called out to Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun, "Get ready to take off." When the two heard this, they put the scissors on the hemp rope connected to the bricks, ready to cut at any time. Cheng Chimo and the other two on the hot air balloon didn't feel good. They held the basket with their hands, and their faces were filled with despair. They thought that they had just been thrown last time, and now they were going to be thrown again. Why was their life so bitter? However, it was not up to them to decide. Since they had boarded the pirate ship, there was no reason to get off. With a snap, the hemp rope was cut, and the hot air balloon slowly floated up. At first, there was nothing. It was still very stable, and it felt the same as before. However, as it got higher and higher, it started to sway. This scared the three of them quite a bit, and they shouted in the basket, "Fengzi, King hurt me again. Help, I don't want to die." They curled up together and cried for their parents. Zhang Feng on the ground put his hands on his hips and raised his head, as if all this had nothing to do with him. In fact, he had been listening carefully. After all, they had just taken off. They didn't fly high, but the sound was very loud. It wasn't that he wasn't worried about Chingchimo and the others. On the contrary, he was very relieved. This time, the hot air balloon had been reinforced, and its stability was much better than before. Moreover, it was only flying for a few hours, and there was no danger at all. On the contrary, these guys kept crying and shouting, and it was annoying. Just as he was thinking about it, the crying gradually quieted down. Zhang Feng glanced at the hot air balloon and realized that it had drifted away. He turned his head and glanced at Ma Zhou and the others. Let's go. Let's go and take a look. On the other hand, Chingchimo and the others felt that the hot air balloon was swaying for a while, and they almost fell off. But now they were fine. They looked at each other and let go of their hands. They leaned over the basket and looked at it. The fear in their hearts lessened. Look over there, that's Xiao Mountain. That's Chang'an City. They slowly let go of themselves, as if they had discovered a new world. After watching for a while, the hot air balloon made a sizzling sound and began to descend. The descent this time was a little different from the previous time. Last time, there was a sudden leak, but this time it was much slower, as if it was blowing air. If one did not listen carefully, they would not be able to tell the difference. The three of them were still sitting in the basket stupidly. It was only when they saw that the ground was getting closer and closer that they came to their senses. Why did it drop? Yeah. Why are we almost at the surface? Didn't Fengzi say that it would take a few incense sticks to burn? As they spoke, the hot air balloon had already descended to the ground. It landed steadily without any undulations. They quickly got down from the basket and surrounded the hot air balloon to look at it curiously. But at this moment, Zhang Feng came over with Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun. Fengzi, why did we come down so quickly? Cheng Chimo looked at Zhang Feng with a puzzled face. Zhang Feng glanced at the hot air balloon and smiled. What? You want to continue playing in the sky? Cheng Chimo waved his hand. Although the hot air balloon gave him a good experience, who would dare to joke with their lives? He hurriedly said, No, I'm just curious. Didn't you say that it would take a few incense sticks to burn? Why did you come down so quickly? Is there a problem? Zhang Sunchong and Du Go also looked at Zhang Feng curiously. However, Zhang Feng didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked around the hot air balloon a few times and finally checked the seal. He revealed an expression of sudden realization and looked at everyone. Actually, I didn't know before, but now I know. After saying that, he looked at Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun and said with a serious face, Remember, don't use hemp rope to seal the balloon next time. The reason why it fell too quickly this time was because there was too little Chichong. Also, the gap in the hemp rope was too big. If you use hemp rope next time, it will definitely be the same as this time. Don't use hemp rope? Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun were a little confused. If they didn't use hemp rope, what would they use? They wanted to ask, but when they thought that their teacher might have other arrangements, they quickly wrote it down in their notebook and said in unison, Yes, teacher. Zhang Feng nodded and then looked at Chingchimo and the others. He asked with a serious face, Did you feel anything unusual when you were up there? This is very serious. In the future, it may be related to human lives. Think carefully before you speak. Chapter 1937. He knew that these guys were usually sloppy. He purposely made things sound more serious to prevent them from spouting nonsense, and to let them know the severity of the situation. Zhang Sunchong was smart and immediately understood Zhang Feng's meaning. After thinking for a while he said, When we were rising, we shook violently. I don't know if that counts. There was nothing else after that. After that, he looked at Cheng Chimo and Du Go. Seeing that they had nothing to add, he nodded and said, That's all. Zhang Feng frowned and was puzzled. Why did it tremble? Wasn't it fine normally? Why was there a problem now? He walked around the hot air balloon a few times, and then checked the parts one by one. When he checked the iron wire, he realized that the iron wire was not tied tightly enough. He thought to himself that these guys were really lucky. They were fine. However, this also showed that Ma Zhou and the rest were not careful. It seemed that he had to be more careful next time. Otherwise, someone might really die. As he thought about it, he glanced at everyone and finally fixed his eyes on Ma Zhou and the rest. This is your mistake. Don't do it again. You have to check all the equipment properly. Otherwise, someone might die. Ma Zhou and the rest saw it and quickly nodded. Yes, teacher. Zhang Feng nodded and said, Go and prepare some candles and some thin copper wire. Remember, it must be thinner than the iron wire this time. Come and find me when you are ready. Ma Zhou and the rest were puzzled. Why did their teacher need candles? They could not use them. However, since their teacher had given them instructions, he might have other intentions. They nodded and turned to leave. Qing Chimo and the rest were idlers. Seeing that they had nothing to do, they found a place to sit around a fire to warm themselves. Zhang Feng saw the commotion and came over. He cupped his hands and felt extremely warm. After a while, Ma Zhou and the rest came back with the items. Teacher, we have the items back. What do we do now? Hao Chujun put the items on the ground and asked seriously. Zhang Feng glanced at it and finally fixed his eyes on the candle. Light the candle first, then drip the wax on the seal. Drip on the seal? Hao Chujun stared blankly at Ma Zhou. He seemed to understand a little. There was a history of using wax to seal envelopes in the military. The wax was airtight. Once it dripped onto the envelope, it would be easy to tell if it had been tampered with. Even now, the military still uses this method to seal envelopes. Could it be that a STEAM teacher wanted to use wax to isolate the airflow? He thought for a moment and asked, Teacher, are you planning to use wax to isolate the airflow? Not bad. Zhang Feng did not hesitate and said directly, Since you can see it, then I will tell you. Wax water has a very good airflow isolation property, and it can also isolate water flow. Chapter 1939. If they wanted to descend, the weight of the hot air balloon couldn't be dropped. Instead, it had to be heavier. Of course, it couldn't be heavier in the air, so they could only rely on the airflow and wind direction to descend. The hot air balloon didn't have a rudder, so it had to move with the wind. This was inevitable and unchangeable. Just now, the Iron Bulls were able to descend safely because the hot air balloon had a slight air leak. It wasn't serious, so they could descend slowly. Now it was different. The hot air balloon's mouth was sealed, and there was no weight inside to suppress it. Who knew when they could descend? Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun were well aware of this, because they had done everything with their own hands. Now, facing their teacher's question, they were a little flustered, but they couldn't not answer. Hao Chujun could only say submissively, Teacher, I was so focused on sealing the mouth that I forgot to put the sandbag. Please punish me. Zhang Feng frowned and thought to himself, This is bad. Without the sandbag to suppress it, the hot air balloon would definitely rise higher and higher. He couldn't care less about what he was thinking and suddenly looked up. As expected, the hot air balloon could now be seen as a shadow. What should they do? The Iron Bulls were brought up to the sky by the hot air balloon, and now the mouth was sealed. When would they come down? Ma Zhou seemed to have noticed something and quickly asked, Teacher, what should we do now? Will Brother Iron Bull and the others be in danger? Zhang Feng glanced at the sky and sighed. There's no danger. After all, the hot air balloon has been perfected. I just don't know when these guys will come down. Hearing this, Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun looked at each other and realized their mistake. They quickly lowered their heads and admitted their mistake. Please forgive us, teacher. This time, it's all our fault. Zhang Feng waved his hand and didn't mind. It's not your fault. You were just following orders. The main thing is that I didn't explain it clearly to you. With that, he sighed and walked towards the fire. You don't have to blame yourselves. Come and sit. Iron Bull and the others won't be in danger. They should be able to come down even when it's dark. Let's sit here and wait for them. Hao Chujun didn't hear any reproach in his teacher's words, so he casually found a seat and sat down. He glanced at the dusky sun in the sky and said, "Teacher, it's already noon. Brother Tainyo should be able to come down by now, right?" Zhang Feng looked up and said uncertainly, "I don't know. He should be able to come down, right?" As soon as he finished speaking, he felt a gurgling sound coming from his stomach, followed by a feeling of hunger. Therefore he looked at Ma Zhou and Ma Li. "Are you guys hungry? Let's go find something to eat." Ma Zhou rubbed his belly and said with a silly smile, "If Master didn't mention it, I wouldn't have felt it. I'm just a little hungry. I'll go and find something." After saying that, he pulled Hao Chujun and ran away. Not long after, the two of them ran back with all kinds of ingredients. There were fish, sweet potatoes, and other things. Ma Zhou grinned at Zhang Feng. "Master, this sweet potato is something I've been looking for a long time. I used to roast it a lot. There's also this fish." Zhang Feng looked at the sweet potato in Ma Zhou's hand, and the hunger in his stomach couldn't help but rise. He swallowed his saliva and said, "Don't talk nonsense. Let's get started." Ma Zhou chuckled and his hands were already moving. Hao Chujun was also helping at the side. The two of them roasted the sweet potato, and the other roasted the fresh fish. Not long after, a melodious fragrance floated out, causing Zhang Feng to swallow his saliva. Time seemed to pass very quickly in winter. The sun that was hanging above their heads just now had already begun to set in the west. Zhang Feng ate the roasted sweet potato in his hand and glanced at the sky. At this glance, he seemed to have discovered something. He suddenly stood up and said in surprise, "Where did Tai Nyo and the others go?" Ma Zhou and Ma Li also hurriedly stood up and carefully scanned the sky. As expected, they didn't find any trace of Tai Nyo and the others. He hurriedly asked, "Master, what should we do now? Has Brother Tai Nyo disappeared?" Zhang Feng was just about to say, "Immediately chase after them," when the tip of his nose was unwillingly attracted by a fragrance. He smelled the fragrance and looked over. He saw that the roasted fish on the fire was already crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. The fish was already cooked. It would be a waste if he didn't eat it. Moreover, Tai Nyo and the others were in the sky. They shouldn't be in any danger, right? After thinking about it, he suppressed the evil thoughts in his heart. He turned around and sat down. He looked at Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun and said, "Come, let's eat the fish first." Eat fish? Hao Chujun and Ma Zhou were stunned. Now that he was eating fish, he wasn't going to look for Brother Tai Nyo and the others? What was their master thinking? Getting rid of the donkey after it had left the millstone? Not admitting it after putting on his pants? No, they couldn't let their master go down the wrong path. Ma Zhou hurriedly said, "Master, finding Brother Tai Nyo is more important now. We should." Halfway through his words, he didn't continue because he knew that his teacher definitely understood what he meant. Actually, his guess wasn't wrong. Zhang Feng indeed understood. However, how could delicious food be more important than brothers? Pay only for now. Chapter 1940. He coughed lightly and said with a straight face, "Think about it, we haven't eaten since this morning. How can we find Tai Nyo if we don't have any strength? So the most important thing now is to replenish our energy. Hurry up and eat." With that, he picked up a piece of grilled fish and started eating. Hao Chujun and Joshua looked at each other and didn't know how to answer. How could eating fish have anything to do with finding people? But what their teacher said made sense. There didn't seem to be anything wrong. If they didn't eat their fill, what would they do if their legs went weak? If Iron Bull's brothers were in danger, they wouldn't be able to save them. The two nodded and silently agreed with this answer in their hearts. So they picked up the remaining grilled fish and started eating. After eating and drinking, Zhang Feng burped and looked at Ma Zhou and Joshua. "Are you full? Let's go find Iron Bull and the others." Ma Zhou quickly put down the fish bone and smacked his lips. "Okay." Actually, when he was eating just now, he felt a little guilty. Iron Bull's brothers were missing, but he was eating and drinking here. He really shouldn't have. However, the smell of the grilled fish made him give up on the distracting thoughts in his heart. How could food be more important than brothers? And they were the kind of brothers that smelled so good. Hao Chujun was different from him. He ate and drank as he pleased. Since his teacher was eating, what did it matter if he ate? And since his teacher had spoken, he couldn't let him down. He wiped the dust off the corner of his mouth and grinned. Teacher, let's go. Zhang Feng nodded and stood up to look around. Then he said, we'll split into 3 directions. I'll go east, Ma Zhou west, Hao Chujun north. If you find him, shout a few times and I should be able to hear you. If you don't find him, go south. If you don't find him in the south, come to the east. There must be one in the 4 directions. Ma Zhou and Zhou Zhuo nodded and turned to walk in different directions. Zhang Feng didn't hesitate and walked straight to the east. There were students shoveling snow on the field every day, so the snow last night wasn't very deep. However, there was still a sound of footsteps on it, like a movement. Obviously, he was not in the mood to appreciate the movement. When he thought of Iron Bull and the others, he could not help but quicken his pace. After walking for about a quarter of an hour, they vaguely saw something that looked like a tent in front of them. Not only that, there were also some flames. How could the research institute have something like this? And why does this thing look like a hot air balloon? Puzzled, he couldn't help but quicken his pace. As he walked closer, he saw 3 people sitting beside the fire. They were Ching Chumo, Zhang Sun Chong and Du Go. This tent-like thing was also a hot air balloon. Chapter 1942. If Fengzi went up, then there would be no danger. To be honest, they were not willing to go up because they were worried about the danger. Now that Zhang Feng went up, these worries were basically eliminated. Zhang Sun understood in his heart and revealed a malicious smile. If we go up, then what about the heavy armor and light cavalry that you promised before? These words reminded Cheng Chimo. He looked at Zhang Feng and quickly said, yes, do you still honor your promise? Zhang Feng smiled, thinking that these guys really knew how to take advantage of the situation. Just now, they said that they would not go up, but now that they heard that he was going up, they immediately thickened their faces and came. However, this was understandable. After all, he had promised these guys. He could only say, honor the promise, okay? Are you going up or not? Yes, I will fight with whoever doesn't go up. Cheng Chimo glared and raised his right hand as he looked at Zhang Sun and Ma Tao. It was as if these words were meant for them to hear. In fact, Zhang Sun was extremely happy. If Fengzi went up, then there would be no danger. He could also get a light cavalry for free. Only a fool would not go up. He quickly raised his right hand and imitated Cheng Chimo. I'm going too. Whoever doesn't go up, I will deal with him right now. Now, only Du Go was left. He was unwilling to go up. These heavy armor and light cavalry had nothing to do with him. Why should he go up? Although it should be dangerous up there, it was cold. Just thinking about the cold wind was enough. However, when he saw Ching Chimo and Zhang Sun look like they wanted to eat him up, he swallowed his words of refusal. He could only say submissively, then let's go. Zhang Feng nodded in satisfaction. Good, Lao Tzu did not misjudge you. As soon as he finished speaking, Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun both staggered back. They were holding silk and many sandbags. They were so tired that they were panting. Hao Chujun quickly stepped forward and threw down the sandbags in his hands. He panted heavily. Teacher, I got the things back. Zhang Feng nodded and glanced at the materials. Start preparing now. You must be quick. After saying that, he glanced at the setting sun. Time passed very quickly in winter, and it was almost Yushur hour. He estimated that it would be dark soon, so he had to speed up. Thus, he looked at Ching Chimo and the others. You guys work together and try to finish it before dark. Ching Chimo and the others didn't say anything and hurriedly went to help. In a short while, the hot air balloon was remade. Ma Zhou looked at Zhang Feng and said seriously, Teacher, the hot air balloon has been prepared. This time, I have checked it 3 times. There is absolutely no problem. Yes. Zhang Feng nodded. Then he pointed at the sandbags on the ground. Put the sandbags there. Put as many as you can. If there are any other heavy objects, you can put them there too. Chapter 1944. Zhang Feng blurted out without thinking. There was no problem with the hot air balloons now. As long as they continued to produce them, they just had to keep up with the rest. However, Ma Zhou did not think so. His teacher had just returned and stayed for a short while. Why was he leaving again? Thus, he tried to persuade him to stay. Teacher, the problem of the hot air balloons has not been solved yet. Are you not coming back? Zhang Feng smiled faintly as if he had seen through Ma Zhou's thoughts. There is no problem with the hot air balloons now. Continue to produce them according to what I said today. It will be of great use in the future. As for the future, I will come to see you often. Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun looked at each other. Seeing that the latter did not speak, he could only say, "Yes, teacher." Zhang Feng nodded in satisfaction. Then he looked at Qing Chumo. What about you guys? Go back to the Zhang mansion. I'm not going back. I want to follow you. Qing Chumo immediately interrupted and said aggressively, If you leave, who will we ask for the heavy armor? He had already thought it through. He had made such a great contribution this time. If this kid did not give him the heavy armor, he would follow him all the time, even if it meant eating. Obviously, Zhang Sunchong had the same idea. He frowned and said, That's right. Don't even think about running away. Unless you give it to us, we will follow you all the time. We will eat and drink your Zhang family's food. Du Gohe did not have such thoughts. However, these two guys had such an attitude. He felt that it was not good enough if he did not say anything. Thus he curled his lips and said reluctantly, Yes, I will follow you too. Not for anything else, but for Iron Bull and Buggy. As soon as he said this, two burning eyes looked over. It was Cheng Chumo and Zhang Sun. In fact, the two of them did not expect this guy to be so determined. Now it seemed that he was really a good brother. However, Zhang Feng was bitter. He smiled bitterly. You guys are really sticky candy. I can't get rid of you even if I want to. Alright then, I am going to the academy. You guys can come if you want. After that, he looked up to the sky and sighed. He turned and walked toward the academy. Cheng Chumo and the others looked at each other and naturally followed closely behind. Now that things had come to this, they naturally could not let this kid go. Zhang Feng walked in front and glanced back from time to time. He found that these guys were really following him. He had a big headache and couldn't help but speed up, trying to get rid of these annoying guys. However, how could Ching Chumo and the others fall for this? Seeing Zhang Feng quicken his pace, he hurriedly chased after him. Zhang Feng returned to the academy in silence. Some students greeted him, but he was not in the mood. He hurried back to his residence and bolted the door, ignoring everyone. Chapter 1947. When Zhang Sunchong and Du Go saw this, they hurriedly chased after him, afraid that the duck in their mouths would fly away. The group walked towards the workshop and arrived in a short while. Before they entered the cave, they felt waves of heat. Cheng Chumo felt that the oil on his body was about to be squeezed dry. He opened the hole and glanced inside. Fengzi, why is it so hot in here? You think it's hot? Zhang Feng glanced behind and smiled. You don't have to come if you don't think it's hot. I didn't force you to come. After he finished speaking, he walked into the cave. Zhang Sunchong glanced at Ching Chumo and smiled. Tainyo, are you defeated? I told you not to speak when you shouldn't. Are you happy now? After he finished speaking, he walked into the cave as well. Dugo didn't say anything and followed Zhang Sun into the cave. Ching Chumo was stunned. Did he say something wrong? He only said one sentence of truth? Shaking his head, he could only walk in. The cave was very dry. As soon as they entered the cave, they smelled saltpeter mixed with the smell of various metals. This was the unique smell of the workshop, and was also a symbol of the workshop. As they walked further in, they heard the sound of metal colliding. It was like a musical movement, singing and dancing for the workers inside. The deeper they went, the higher the temperature. They felt that their clothes were about to be dried by the heat. Finally, the group passed through the tunnel, and their eyes suddenly opened up. This was like a small world. The surrounding walls had all been mined, chiseled into an oval-shaped world. There were many small holes in the middle, and an oil lamp was placed in each hole, illuminating the entire mine very clearly. Below, a group of workers were holding metal hammers and hammering some kind of weapon. From time to time, they would put the weapon in the furnace to quench it. Then they would take it out and put it in the water. Then they would examine it carefully. Just like that, they repeatedly hammered, quenched and quenched. They kept repeating the same process. Behind this group of people there was a round table, and around the table sat 3 to 5 big men. Their upper bodies were naked, and there was a cup of turbid liquid in front of them. It looked like some kind of tea, and under these cups, there were some papers with all kinds of pictures drawn on them. A burly man picked up the cup in his hand, and was about to drink when he inadvertently glanced at the cave entrance. As if he saw something, he suddenly stood up and shouted, "Dean!" This roar immediately alarmed everyone. "Dean, it's the Dean! The Dean is back!" Everyone stopped what they were doing and looked towards the entrance of the cave. Immediately, they were overjoyed and cried out in surprise. Zhang Feng smiled and raised his right hand to greet everyone. "Thank you for your hard work." After saying that, he slowly walked down. There were also some precautions inside. Firstly, it was to prevent people from stealing. Secondly, it was also dangerous inside. There were all kinds of weapons, so it was better to prevent people from stealing and other dangerous situations. Zhang Feng naturally knew about this, but he didn't care because Iron Bull and the others were his people. Therefore, he looked at Arkanon and smiled. "They are my people." Arkanon nodded and didn't say anything. Since the dean had said so, he didn't want to interrupt. However, Cheng Chimo seemed to be a little dissatisfied. He waved the gun in his hand and asked, "How do you use this thing?" Zhang Feng took the gun and threw it aside. He smiled and said, "This is just a small thing. I'll take you to see the world later." Then he looked at Arkanon and said, "Let's go and see your thing." Cheng Chimo and the others were confused. They had been here before, but they didn't know what was inside. What did he mean by the world? Although they were curious, they still followed. The group walked into another cave. There were all kinds of weapons here. There were Mitsubishi army knives, and some strangely shaped weapons. This attracted the eyes of Cheng Chimo and the others. So this was what Feng Zi meant by the world. Compared to the outside world, this was indeed the world. There were so many weapons here. The three of them couldn't suppress their excitement anymore. They ran to their favorite weapons. Zhang Sunchong picked up a Mitsubishi army knife and started to play with it seriously. Dugo chose a tang saber and waved it around in the air. It was as if he was a great general. Cheng Chimo was a little different. He picked up a gun and gestured in front of his chest. He still didn't know how to use it, but he was interested in this thing. He saw from Feng Zi's eyes that this thing was not ordinary. Also, wasn't there a saying that the weirder the weapon, the faster it died? This thing was so weird. Maybe it was good for killing people. Thinking about this, he held the gun and looked at Zhang Feng. "Feng Zi, can you tell me how to use this thing now?" Zhang Feng didn't answer. Instead, he turned to Arkanon and asked seriously, "Are these new things you researched?" Zhang Suncheng could no longer suppress the excitement in his heart. He quickly went forward and grabbed the gun. With a face full of excitement, he said, "Fengzi, quickly teach me how to use this thing. Why can't I hit it, but you can?" That's right, that's right. Fengzi, tell us quickly." Cheng Chumo also rushed in front of Zhang Feng, his face full of anticipation. Zhang Feng waved his hand impatiently. "Didn't you guys just say that this thing is useless? Why are you saying that it's powerful now?" Du Go chuckled, feeling a little embarrassed. "Fengzi, that was just then, but now is now. We've seen you display your invincible might, and right now, our admiration for you is like a torrential river. Don't tell me you want to refuse?" The corner of Zhang Feng's mouth twitched. This guy had some martial arts, and even knew how to flatter people. But why did it feel like he had heard these words before? It wasn't bad. Thinking about this, he raised his head and said proudly, "Seeing that you guys respect me, I'll reluctantly teach you guys a few moves." Du Go frowned. He thought to himself, "You really think you're something?" However, he still had a smile on his face. "Fengzi, hurry up. Don't dawdle here." Zhang Feng rolled his eyes at Du Go and placed the gun on his shoulder. He then looked at the crowd and said, "Watch carefully. I'll show you once." With that, he squinted his eyes and looked at the crosshair. He aimed at the target and pulled the trigger. A burst of flame spewed out, and the target shook. Cheng Chumo's eyes widened in disbelief, because he had fired more than 5 times, but none of them had hit. How did Fengzi hit the target with just one shot? This was a bit amazing. Could this guy be a sharpshooter? Zhang Sun and Du Go also looked at Zhang Feng with a strange expression. The two of them had just fired and deeply understood how difficult it was to hit this thing. Even the aiming finger was shaking non-stop. But Madman actually hit the target with every shot? Could this guy be a freak? Actually, Zhang Feng also didn't think that he could hit it. Just now, instead of saying that he was demonstrating, it was more accurate to say that he was angered. They actually said that the gun wasn't powerful? Now that he hit it, it was a bit hard to believe. Actually, his hitting was closely related to his previous practice. Previously, every time Algernon improved, he would call him over to experiment. Over time, this kind of effect had been achieved, but he didn't know it. Chapter 1951. Cheng Chumo looked at the target, then turned to look at Zhang Feng. He said in surprise, "Fengzi, you're so good." Although he didn't want to admit it, he still said it subconsciously. Zhang Feng naturally liked to hear these words. He smiled and said, "Of course. You can be like me if you practice more." After saying that, he handed the gun to Cheng Chumo and let him practice. Cheng Chumo took the gun and was overjoyed. It was as if he had mastered the trick. Zhang Sun had other thoughts in his mind. Since the gun was so powerful, it would definitely injure or kill people if it hit them. It would be a little scary if this thing leaked out. What if it hit him? What should he do? He didn't even dare to think about it. It would be perfect if he had a piece of armor that could defend against it. Thinking about it, he looked at Zhang Feng and asked expectantly, "Fengzi, your gun is so powerful. Is there anything that can restrain it? For example, armor or something like that?" Something that could restrain it? Zhang Feng frowned. He didn't think so much when he was researching this thing. And he didn't need it. However, this fellow's words reminded him of something. If he needed to defend himself in the future, or if the gun leaked out, it would be bad for him. With that thought in mind, he looked at Alkinnon and asked with a serious expression, "Alkinnon, have you ever thought about this?" Arkinnon naturally heard Zhang Suan's words. He thought for a moment and said, "Dean, have you forgotten? You made something like armor and made it into a special combat suit. It's bulletproof. But I don't know if the improved gun can defend against it." Zhang Feng seemed to remember something. He had made a special combat suit before, but it had been a long time. He didn't know how effective it was against guns. Thinking of this, he quickly asked, "Arkinnon, do you still have a special combat suit?" "Yes." Arkinnon nodded. "The dean left a lot of them in the workshop." Zhang Feng thought for a moment and immediately said, "Take out all the special combat suits immediately. Let's test them and see if they can defend against the firearms this time." Algernon nodded. He turned around and said a few words to the big man beside him. The big man turned around and walked into the cave. After a while he came back with a pile of clothes that looked like armor. Zhang Feng knew that this was the special combat uniform from back then. He hurriedly went forward to take one and weighed it in his hand. It seemed to weigh about a few kilograms, and the inside was very thick. It was all steel plates. He handed the special combat suit to Arkanon and said seriously, "Arkanon, tie this special combat suit to the tree." Right now, the special combat uniform was still in its previous configuration. It was hard to say if it could defend against the current firearms. Before the results of the experiment were out, they definitely couldn't experiment on humans. Tying them to a tree was the safest method. Arkanon understood. He led his men to tie the special combat suit to the tree. Seeing this, Zhang Feng looked at Chingchimo and the others. He smiled and said, "Now I'll give you a chance to practice shooting. Let's see who can hit the clothes on the tree." "There's no reward for hitting it?" Chingchimo asked shamelessly. "How dare you ask?" Zhang Feng looked at Chingchimo unhappily and snorted. "I let you hit it so you can practice. You want to ask me for something? If you don't want to hit it, Lao Tzu will find some people. Anyway, there's no shortage of people here. Hit, hit, hit. I didn't say I'm not hitting." Chingchimo laughed and hurriedly gave Zhang Sun and the others a look. Zhang Sun and the others were smart. They all raised their firearms and started to fire according to what Arkanon had taught them. Bang, bang, bang. A few shots were fired, but none of them hit. Instead, the birds in the forest were scared and flew away. Zhang Feng saw this and curled his lips. He raised the gun in his hand and shouted, "Get out of the way for Lao Tzu. I gave you a chance but you didn't use it. Watch Lao Tzu." Everyone had no choice but to give way. Zhang Feng aimed slightly and raised his gun. The flame spurted out and the tree shook slightly. It seemed that he had hit it. He hurriedly raised his gun and walked to the tree. He saw that half of the special combat suit had been pierced and half of the steel ball had sunk in. Arkanon also walked over. He frowned and said, "Director, this special combat suit is a bit useless. It's been pierced." Zhang Feng did not answer. He took off the special combat suit and studied it carefully. Soon he found a problem. Although there was a steel plate inside, it could not achieve the effect of cushioning. Moreover, steel plate and steel ball were both very hard materials. When they collided with each other, one of them would definitely be damaged. However, if there was no steel plate, what could be used to block the gun? After all, modern bulletproof vests were also made of steel plate. However, there were also some nylon, organic fibers, resins, and so on. Nylon and organic fibers were not available. With a bitter face he said, "Why? We're not coolies, are we? There's strength in numbers." Zhang Feng smiled and glanced at the forest. "Look, everyone has gone to work. Don't you feel embarrassed to be here? Also, when I make the things later, I will definitely give you some benefits." He knew that these guys wouldn't do anything without benefits. When he made the new special combat uniform later, they would definitely ask for it. In that case, it was better to let these guys work first. Moreover, as long as he promised them benefits, they would be more eager than the other. As expected, Chingchimo's eyes lit up and he said excitedly, "Really? Wait a minute, I want the best." After that, he rushed into the forest with a tang knife. Zhang Sunchong and Dugo naturally didn't want to be left behind. They picked up a tang knife and chased after him. "Tainyo, wait for me." Zhang Feng turned to look at Arkanon and said, "The special combat uniforms I asked you to make before were all made of steel plates, right?" "Yes." Arkanon nodded and thought for a while. "Director, is there something wrong with them?" Zhang Feng took out a cigarette from his waist and lit it. He took a deep puff, and then looked at Arkanon seriously. "Actually, we were wrong before. Think about it. Steel balls are made of steel, and steel plates are also made of steel. What will happen when the two collide?" Arkanon lowered his head and pondered. Zhang Feng took a puff of his cigarette and continued. "The speed of the steel ball is very fast, we all know this. The moment it is fired from the barrel of the gun, it will produce an extremely high temperature. If it suddenly hits a wooden board, it can easily penetrate it because wooden boards are not strong. This is very easy to understand, but what about steel plate? They are made of the same material. The moment they come into contact, they will produce a higher temperature. That's why the experiment just now failed, and the special combat uniform was penetrated. Do you understand? Arkanon nodded as if he didn't fully understand. He asked with some doubt. Then, as you said, steel plates are useless, right? No. Chapter 1953. Zhang Feng shook the cigarette between his fingers and said seriously, "The steel plate is not useless. It's just that it's not very effective when it collides with the steel balls. However, we still have to use the steel plate." Alkinnon nodded again, but this time he seemed to have understood something. He quickly said, "So you're going to use resin to mix it in?" Zhang Feng smiled with satisfaction. "Yes, resin has a softening effect, especially when it has a tendency to flow under the influence of external forces. When you punch it, you won't be able to exert any force at all. For example, if a steel ball moves very fast and can cause great damage to anything, it may not be the same for resin. First of all, resin is neither soft nor hard. When you hit it, it will immediately break down the strength of the steel ball. Secondly, even if the steel ball is strong and breaks the resin will still be like what I said just now, breaking down the strength of the steel ball. Moreover, there is a steel plate behind the resin. In this way, the safety factor of the special combat suit can be greatly improved." Alkinnon nodded and lowered his head to digest what the director had said. "Don't rush. Take it slow." Zhang Feng smiled and said, "I just thought of this thing. You'll know the effect when it's done." As soon as he finished speaking, Cheng Chimo and the others ran over with a basin in their hands. Inside the basin was a yellow, sticky substance. It was the resin. Alkinnon looked at the basin and frowned. "Director, is this the resin you were talking about?" Although he had seen resin hanging on trees before, he had never seen such a large basin. Moreover, it was collected. It looked a little strange. Zhang Feng nodded with satisfaction. "That's right. This is the resin I was talking about." Then he looked at Cheng Chimo. "What tree's resin is this?" Every tree's resin had a different effect in usage, so it had to be distinguished. Cheng Chimo scratched his head and looked at Zhang Sun. "What kind of resin is this?" "Pine resin." Zhang Sun rolled his eyes at Cheng Chimo. "Oh yes, it's pine resin." Cheng Chimo quickly looked at Zhang Feng and smiled. "It's pine resin." Zhang Feng nodded and said to Arkanon, "When the others come back, tell them to bring the resin to the cave. We'll go back and do the experiment first." With that, he led Cheng Chimo into the cave. Arkanon gave a few orders to his subordinates and hurriedly followed. Inside the cave, Zhang Feng looked at the resin in Cheng Chimo's hand and said, "Pour all the resin into the furnace." The resin had just been scraped off, and there were still many impurities. It needed to be quenched at a high temperature to obtain the final essence. Although some of it would be lost, it had to be done for better effect. Moreover, the resin would turn into a liquid after high temperature, which was more suitable to be added to the special combat suit. Chapter 1955. They hadn't smoked since they came to the academy. Now that they saw Fengzi smoking, they craved for it. Zhang Feng also understood that these guys were probably addicted to smoking. He smiled and took out 3 cigarettes from his waist, and threw them to the 3 of them. Cheng Chimo took out a lighter from his waist. The 3 of them huddled together like a group of drug addicts. Of course, Algernon didn't have such hobbies. He squatted in front of the steel plate, and felt that the temperature was about right. He touched it with his hand. As expected, the temperature had dropped. He quickly turned to Zhang Feng and said, "Director, the temperature has dropped." Hearing this, Zhang Feng threw away the cigarette in his hand and stood up abruptly. He touched the steel plate and couldn't help smiling. It's not as fast as this thing. Then he looked at Algernon and said, "Take it out and get ready for the experiment." Algernon nodded, picked up the special combat suit and walked out of the door. Qing Chimo hurried to follow him. At the back of the mountain, Zhang Feng looked at the special combat suit in Algernon's hand and said with a smile, "Tie it to the tree. Let's start." Algernon nodded and tied the special combat suit to the tree. "Now I'll give you a chance. Shoot that suit. How about it?" Zhang Feng turned to Qing Chimo and the others and smiled. Qing Chimo and Zhang Sun looked at each other and didn't say anything. They knew that it was a practice and there was no harm in it. So they took out their guns and started to aim. Bang, bang, bang. After 3 shots, the tree only shook a little. It seemed that only one of the shots hit the target. Zhang Feng didn't care who hit the tree. He strode forward and saw a steel ball scattered on the ground. The special combat suit on the tree only had some marks, but it didn't crack. He quickly took off his special combat uniform and checked it in his hands. Sure enough, the effect was much better than before. There were only some marks left, and there was no damage at all. Arkanon also bent down and looked at it carefully. He said in surprise, "Director, your method is really effective. This special combat suit not only blocked the steel balls, but also didn't get hurt." Zhang Feng nodded and stroked the marks on the special combat uniform. He smiled and said, "This method needs to be widely promoted." At this point he frowned. "It's just that the resin alone isn't good enough. If you have other things in the future, you can try adding a little more." Algernon nodded. Suddenly he thought of something. "This special combat suit is so effective. I wonder how it will look on a human. Wearing it on a human body?" Zhang Feng raised his eyebrows. He hadn't tested this yet, so he didn't know what would happen. He had already tested it on a tree, but humans and trees were different after all. If someone with that in mind, he turned to look at Qing Chimo and the others.